Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we document my shift to a career in AI safety. This show aims to serve as a mentorship proxy for those getting into the field, and a mentorship amplifier for our guests and myself. As always, I'm your host, Jacob Haynes. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. What's up, guys? It's Jacob here with another... Alright, now that that's over with, actually, welcome back. I know I haven't posted something in quite some time, but part of the reason is because this episode is really, really long, so it took a while to make. The other reasons are going to be gone into more in depth on the Into AI Safety podcast website. Irregardlessly, I am super excited to share this one with you guys. It is an interview with the almost Dr. Igor Krawczuk, who was a research lead for the Winter 2024 AI Safety Camp. And I gotta say, he is probably the most well-read individual with respect to machine learning and optimization, as well as governance and philosophy regarding technology, that I have ever had the chance to talk to. What I love about this interview is that Igor's perspective and framing is an incredible foil to my recent interview with Dr. Peter Park, and yet he still arrives at largely similar conclusions. There are two versions of this interview, one which I tried to keep as streamlined as possible without losing any nuance, and another which includes far more technical detail and additional resources as well. Make sure that you're listening to the right one for you. Now, let's get into one hell of an interview in which we cover open source, EA, and rationalist philosophies, eugenics, emergence, and more with the almost Dr. Igor Krawczuk.
Yes, my name is Igor Krawczuk and I use he, him pronouns. And I am a very terminal PhD student at EPFL, which is the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, the French pendant to the ETH Zurich. And like very terminal means I submitted my thesis draft last Wednesday and will be defending on the 28th of February, which is in 3 weeks from now.
Nice. Congratulations.
Let's see, like I'm still very kind of in the don't say you have succeeded before you have actually succeeded to not jinx it mood, but yeah, like I hope it will go fine.
Well, at the very least, you submitted it. That's an accomplishment.
I am so relieved. And my work has been a bit all over the place, partially because I only got diagnosed and medicated for ADHD in the last year of my PhD, which, as an advice to anyone struggling in the PhD in the second year, get checked for ADHD. It really helps to know and have medication.
I can confirm that that's true.
And also, even if you don't get medication, just knowing why is super helpful. Like there's so much like self-hate removed. So that helped. And but before that, I started out doing hardware design for machine learning accelerators. The idea being in like 2015, when I was kind of like sketching out, I might want to do a PhD, what actually seems to drive this new amazing machine learning thing. And it was like GPUs. Like once you read a bit into it, you always saw, okay, like massive compute. And then how do you keep making better compute? Well, there's like NVIDIA and AMD like pushing the CMOS stuff. But what would be like the next thing, like the research frontier? And then I looked at quantum computing, molecular computing, field computing, which is super beautiful, but maybe not very practical. And then neuromorphic computing. And I settled on that last one because it was kind of the closest to the current one. It's basically just designing whatever system you build a bit closer, inspired by the brain or biological principles to get more energy efficiency. So this was like the start of the thing. So then I joined this lab that was doing memoristive in-memory computing, as at least on their tagline. And it was actually really cool.
All right, so like I said at the beginning, I did publish 2 versions of this interview. In this one, I will skip the more technical details and tangents, which, to be clear, I think are incredibly interesting. But I can understand that not everyone wants that. So, if you'd, for example, like to hear more about memristive technology, head on over to the other recording. But if not, feel free to stay here.
And in theory, that means you get a constant time matrix multiplication, which will make any computer scientist usually water in their mouth, because usually it's like n square plus a very annoying omega. But in practice, you don't fully get constant time because you still need to kind of like activate one input at a time or one output at a time, because otherwise things melt because of current density. And like, as I was digging into that material science, circuit science stuff, I was learning the computer science to actually implement learning algorithms on these devices. And all of these say, oh yeah, large batch sizes. You need large batch sizes, just ever larger batch sizes, like batch size 32,000 on the state-of-the-art image models. Like, and you look at these two things and you realize, okay, this can't work together. So then, because of this and some rearrangement in my lab, I kind of switched topics. So I switched from hardware design for ML accelerators to do machine learning for hardware design. And that then went through a bunch of iterations, because actually that is also a really difficult problem, because hardware design is just a restricted form of program synthesis, which is not the easiest ML problem to do.
Right.
So in the end, I don't know if you know that meme picture of like your thesis when you start, and it's like this beautiful dragon from a Chinese parade, and then your thesis when you submit it is like a crayon drawn, like a sickly little beast. So like this happened, and my thesis ended up being on scalable graph generation methods. So learning basically a GAN or diffusion model, but not for images, where you have a lot of nice inductive bias that you can exploit, but for abstract things, for, in my case, circuits, but also for molecules, for street networks, for program traces. And I love these, like GNNs and the related literature of like equivariant and invariant ML for me is like the correct thing to do, like because it's kind of this bridge between actually understanding what's happening and still having like the deep learning stuff of YOLO, just throw data at it. Like you get to do meaningful things, but also things that get you high numbers on a benchmark. And while I was doing all of this, I was a bit drawn in a bunch of different directions. I was doing reinforcement learning and various types of, like, basically every ML you can think of, I've at least played it with it once, because I was trying to fit it onto the circuit originally. So like literally like put it onto the hardware accelerator and see if we have a chance of running it. And then when that failed and I joined the other lab, I actually tried to like apply it to circuit design. So I have a pretty broad reading. And I was also kind of tangentially in this EA rationalist community. I was never part of it because like the rationalist community gives me bad vibes most of the time, to say it nicely. I can go into the people are nice, but the whole framework of thinking, I'm really uncomfortable with it. And there's some intellectual lineages that are not fully disavowed and have a lot of influence still, that like not only in the rationalist community, but also in Silicon Valley in general, but we can get into that later. And the EAs is like not quite my politics, but nice people. So I usually think in half spaces of like, there's people who are against you, and then there's everyone who's kind of pointing in the right direction, but maybe not exactly the same direction. And if you're like a pragmatic person, you should collaborate with everyone who's in the right half space, because you can still argue later, but you can exploit that partial alignment. So that's my connection to EA. And there I spend most of the time like in this AI safety debate of like, is AGI gonna come? What is dangerous? What is not dangerous? What is the right like approach to things? What type of governance should we be doing? And this is why we're talking now, kind of, because basically I've spent possibly, I'm not going to make it's always like I want to kind of like express that I think I'm competent on talking about this without sounding like an overconfident asshole, basically.
Okay.
But like I've spent over 7 years, like 8 or 9 years, following Eliezer Yudkowsky.
I know last time I joked about having long asides, but I actually think this one's going to be even longer. There are just too many different ideas to cover, and I probably don't even cover them that well. But here's my attempt to keep things as short and sweet as possible. Since we broke on the name Eliezer Yudkowsky, let's start there. Eliezer Yudkowsky, sometimes shortened to EY, which you will notice Igor do later in the interview, is one of the individuals that catalyzed the field of AI safety and the perspectives held by many of the individuals within the domain. Yudkowsky founded the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, or MIRI, in 2000, and he is still conducting research today, at least supposedly, but more on that in a bit. His work strongly influenced discourse surrounding the question of AI safety, notably including Nick Bostrom's 2014 book, Superintelligence: Paths, Dangers, Strategies. Now, just a real quick aside on Nick Bostrom. Don't worry, it'll come up later. Yes, this is the Nick Bostrom whose work on existential risk helped launch the long-termist movement. Yes, his 2014 book was indeed the subject of an Elon Musk tweet in which Musk said the book was worth a read, and that superintelligence could be more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Yes, this is also the same Nick Bostrom who just last year had to make an apology for an email from 1996 in which he claimed, quote, "blacks are more stupid than whites," unquote, and used the N-word. That email was dug up by Emil Torres, who had previously worked with FHI, but has since been outspokenly against the ideologies that the group promotes. Worth mentioning is that there also seemed to be some evidence of fabrication by Emil in some social media interactions they had throughout the 2010s. But personally, I would characterize these as exactly the kind of stunts you would expect to see on social media during that time period, so take it with a grain of salt. Alright, now back to Yudkowsky. In the 2000s, Yudkowsky was one of two primary contributors to the blog known as Overcoming Bias, the other being Robin Hanson. The blog was primarily about the philosophy of rationality, or the idea that reason is the chief source and test of knowledge. Their work was funded by Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, which was run by Nick Bostrom. Notably, FHI closed in April of 2024, that is, last month, and although the group had been on the ropes for a few years, Bostrom's email and sidestepping apology were likely to have been the nail in the coffin. Anyways, after 3 years of rationality writing, Yudkowsky independently founded Less Wrong, or LW, which he described as, quote, community blog devoted to refining the art of human rationality, unquote. Additional context on the Yud includes that he believes that an intelligence explosion is inevitable, which provides him the justification for pursuing the alignment of AI systems. And that is indeed what MIRI pursued. Well, probably? The thing is, despite MIRI's immense budget, the organization's research output was quite minimal, as Eliezer believes that publishing a majority of their research would promote so-called AI doom scenarios more than prevent them. On April 1st of last year, he posted to Less Wrong that MIRI, the research organization he runs, was changing its plan to a, quote, death with dignity, unquote, approach. That is, alignment isn't possible in the current paradigm, we might as well try to stop AI altogether, and when we inevitably fail, at least we can say that we did our best. Note that although it was posted on April Fools, this post was definitely not entirely satirical. In fact, it was probably mostly not satirical. Okay, but why are we talking about this guy? The Effective Altruism, or EA community, has strong ties to Less Wrong, and both communities make up an above-baseline portion of the researchers in Silicon Valley. In fact, I think it's fair to say that the discourse on the forum has had a meaningful impact on the methodology, priorities, and perspectives of many in that expensive region of California, particularly within the domain of AI safety. Speaking of the extent to which an ideology has pervaded Silicon Valley and big tech altogether, I'll also take this aside to bring up Timnit Gebru, who was the technical co-lead of the ethical artificial intelligence team at Google from 2018 to 2020. You may remember her name from the controversy that erupted around her firing from Google near the end of 2020. The controversy began when Gebru, along with 6 other researchers, 4 of whom were also working for Google at the time, submitted the paper on the dangers of stochastic parrots. Can language models be too big? For the conference held by the Association for Computing Machinery in 2021. Soon, she received an email from Google management asking her to either withdraw the paper or remove the names of all authors employed by Google, supposedly using the justification that the paper ignored recent research. Timnit then naturally threatened to resign, although she maintained that she had made no formal offer to resign. Google terminated her employment immediately. So, what could she and the other authors of the Stochastic Parrots paper have put into that publication that would result in this aggressive action by Google? Well, that's a tough question, as it covers a lot. But, as always, I'll try to give you the condensed version and encourage you to read the paper yourself. I would like to preempt this by saying that by no means will I be able to comprehensively cover the arguments presented in the paper or the responses that its critics have shared. Honestly, this probably deserves an episode in its own right. Anyways, Stochastic Parrots, in its own words, took a step back and asked, how big is too big with regards to the scaling of both data and compute that go into current large language models? What are the possible risks associated with LLMs, and what paths are available for mitigating those risks? I go more in depth in the full version, but the gist is that Timnit and other authors called out big tech for its unethical behaviors in pursuit of profit promised by leveraging LLMs. They also provided concrete suggestions on how to move forward, most of which would necessarily limit the corporations from generating those mad stacks with the technology. Stochastic Parrots also takes aim at the idea that LLMs have achieved natural language understanding, or NLU, capabilities. This contrasts with the word choice used by other researchers and big tech companies who claim that LLMs have achieved natural language understanding. But wait, that's not all. Timnit isn't done yet. She recently co-authored a paper titled The TESCREAL Bundle, Eugenics and the Promise of Utopia Through Artificial General Intelligence, in which Gebru and Torres claim that the CEOs of Silicon Valley largely prescribe to the so-called TESCREAL Bundle, which stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, modern cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Many of the points that I discussed with Igor are also brought up to some extent in this paper, including, for example, the origins, meaning, and value of the concept of intelligence. As a final note, in this astronomical aside, regardless of your stance on Gebru's previous research, regardless of your preferred method of making AI safe, and regardless of your take on how well the arguments support the conclusions, it's important to be cognizant of the roots from which the field of AI safety was grown.
Elias Yudkowsky doing his thing, and then the whole thing growing into the Silicon Valley and Miri and other things, and then the EA movement growing, and then it becoming kind of mainstream, and then OpenAI, and so on. And I have been trying to read all of the sometimes really badly written, deconfusing pieces and attempts of making an argument for why actually this and this risk is dangerous. And I phrased it when we entered it, I'm just not convinced, and I think it's doing harm.
Okay.
So that's nothing. So I was kind of involved in some publications there that I got in through friends. So I'm very grateful. It's a very nice and open community. I love the people. If the whole world had the same kind of nice people density as the AI community, as the rationalist community, as a thing, it would be really nice. But I still don't want the communities to grow too much or to get too much power, because there's some things that to me are deep misunderstandings about the things they obsess about. And it's usually rooted in the fact that you don't have as the thought leaders, you don't have experts. Now, some of the experts grew up in that community. So people like Dan Hendricks, people like Jacob Steinhardt, I think, people like David Kruger. Like they are super competent people that I believe that they have like their own like informed thing to disagree with me, and I would be happy to like have a object level debate with them on this stuff. But they are the exception, and the vast amount of like thought leaders is amateurs in the original sense, so, like people who just love the topic and they were like self-taught. In the best case, they actually got really competent in the specific thing of self-taught. But the thing that you don't get as an amateur is a curriculum. And a curriculum exposes you to the ideas that aren't on the happy path, that aren't on the things that kind of confirm yourself. And if you don't have that like basic exposure before you form your opinion, then it's hugely likely, at least in the way I read what we know about belief formation, that you're going to pick up like very idiosyncratic interpretations of things, and these will harden because as you see new stories, you will be looking for stuff that confirms your view. And it is a luxury to be able to afford to actually deeply have doubt for a long time and like get deep into a topic while just checking your doubts, basically. Maybe someone can point out where I have a big, giant gap that I just didn't see it yet. But in the last 7 years, I have a privilege of basically being funded by the Swiss state, of just reading about AI and ML, like just that, and just optimization theory. My lab is an optimization lab, so hugely obscure stuff. And I was hugely unproductive because of the ADHD. I was just reading and like trying to get all of the context. So when I say like I don't think AGI will ever be an issue, where either we don't get it or we can trivially control it. And when I say that like the only interesting problem in AI safety is the principal agent problem and the problem of like how do you ensure like good governance by some metric, and that this is like a social choice theory problem that has been done already and it has active research attached to it. I feel like I'm speaking from a level of like competence, and even that, like I still feel like the doubt of insecurity. Maybe I'm missing something, but when I look at like, for example, like somebody I actually respect, like Dan Hendricks' thing of evolution favors AI, or whatever his preprint on the game theory behind why AI systems might be evolutionary advantage towards humans. And I look at it and I heavily disagree, and I feel like he has completely missed the program of like the Berkeley gang of Stephen Jay Gould, who kind of like showed the huge impact of the social part in like shaping evolutionary preferences. And it feels to me like a text that was written by someone extremely smart, very well read, but somebody who had kind of like the main message already set. It is, okay, there's a risk of AI takeover, and there's some other risk as well. And the reason why I respect Dan Hendricks in particular is that he at least makes all of the other risks also explicit. He's one of the only authors that consistently puts things like corporate capture and like the societal impact and the power dynamics and the abuse on at least somewhat the same limelight as the Terminator scenarios. So like,
yeah, I actually so over this summer, I did a case the Center for AI Safety, founded by Dan Hendricks. They have a textbook that's coming out soon, I believe, and I did a sprint course with them. I do think that it really gave a good introduction to these ideas, and it spent a lot of time. Like, there's a whole section on ethics. There's a section on how that applies to machine learning, and a lot of the portions in there are very much addressing like, okay, when we create this, if we are going to make it so that, you know, a small group of people has full access and no one else does, that necessarily means that that would result in massive job loss and concentration of power. How do we resolve that? So I do think that there are a lot of good things that are being written at the very least, and introduced to, I guess, this more EA started version of the AI problem.
I would disagree that it's like enough. I would say it's better than everything in the field, but it's like a low bar. And like the thing of his that I like is his unsolved problems in AI safety, like the preprint from 2021. That one has multiple like sections dedicated to actually this thing of power and abuse, which is usually like rare, and also like legitimacy and different ways for. So like that is like what's still missing from the course for me is like an actual like justification why simple trivial solutions don't fix this thing. So like some of the kind of like failure cases or unexpected hazards, they are not things that you fix by fixing the ML. They're things you fix by not doing a stupid thing with the technology. And it's kind of a thing like, if you have a tool which gives you a system that you know is a statistical surrogate optimizer, and it can do a very specific task that you have defined in a very loose way, and you know that you don't have a formal model for it, and you don't have any guarantees of performance, and you then apply this thing to a task and it does something unexpected. That's not the system like how we're trying to rebrand it now, like misgeneralizing, or like there's a paper by actually a friend of mine that studies like misgeneralization in RL. And,
right, you can't attribute that to the system not understanding the goal. It's about the like you didn't define it.
Like it's all misspecification. The system does exactly what it set out to do, but your specification includes the training process. It includes everything, and like you can argue, oh, but it's so complex that we don't quite know what we're specifying. But that's the same thing with like laws and software and everything we do. Like even if you have an intern and you tell that intern, hey, can you quickly do the thing the customer is calling? Like you're relying on an accurate internal model of that intern. And if you don't get it right, then that's also going to cause a hazard. You wouldn't call that like a problem of intern safety. That's like you being not clear, and no amount of like intern engineering is gonna get you to avoid that ambiguity. And then that's what I mean with there's the specter of Terminator lurking. That there's always this implicit assumption, oh, but at some point it's gonna be superhuman and we won't understand it, and all we can do is to pray to the machine and have the right incantations in place and hope that it's already aligned with us and will do this recursive self-optimization, which, if you go to that level, then you're basically back to, okay, hopefully our global system is aligned and creates the right incentives for people to do the research to make that happen. But it becomes indistinguishable towards the problem of building a society that optimizes for the right things. And it's strictly an easier problem because you have white box access. And you had this long before mechanistic interpretability. Like you always had white box access. You could just turn it off and study it, and we just didn't bother because we didn't need to. And all of the failures that happened in production, like the YouTube radicalization pipeline, that was a thing for a brief moment. Like I remember a talk by a guy from YouTube who was talking about the Q-Slate algorithm that they use to do the recommendation, where they have this nice decomposition of how you can do RL on like recommendation systems, so then you can train them with RL. And like their value function, he phrases like, oh, it's something like a lifetime customer value, but not only. And it's like, yeah, sure, like it's lifetime customer value, including stuff like bad PR and all of the other stuff, and only once you're forced to do that. So like as soon as journalists started writing, hey, YouTube is creating Nazis, suddenly it stopped creating Nazis by recommending them, because actually they could have stopped that just from the get-go. They just didn't bother because it's like not a part of their like corporate incentive structure. And whenever you talk about stuff like this, it's important to say nobody is evil here and nobody is stupid here. Like, this is just like, this is when, if you want to study alignment and this idea of like systems being out of control, you're doing politics, you're doing like principal agent and economics research on how you have optimizers for profit or optimizers for power and like evolutionary survival. So like institutions try to survive as a like abstract or visible emergent thing. If you go to that level of abstractions, you're operating there. And to his credit, just to finish this rant a bit, Dan Hendricks, actually, I saw he has on Twitter, like I think from last month only, like in December, that he has gotten less worried about AI takeover because of the mechanistic interpretability things. So like, again, like, out of all of the people in this field who seem to be like true believers, like him is like one of the people that I respect the most. That's why I'm using him as an example, because he kind of demonstrates the stuff that makes me a bit worried in his older writings, but I can say nice things about him as well. That like,
sure,
yeah. So and because of all of these like opinions, I was trying to get involved basically. So that's why I participated in this Trust in AI report, and my main contribution, I would say, was pointing out that probably the auditors need to be able to actually enforce consequences on any actor doing the AI. That without consequences and accountability, you can't create trustworthiness. And like stuff like that is a thing that isn't salient in the community. Again, not because anyone is evil, but, and now personal take, personal view, and why I do this interview partially as well, is because it is hugely like homogeneous. It's mainly like people like you and me, like white dudes. I'm presuming you're kind of like gender identity a bit, and mainly like at least kind of like tenuously middle class and upper, like statistically speaking, and like that perspective that kind of like biases you towards identifying with the winners of like the AI thing, whichever it might be, means like you probably worry a lot less about stuff like abuse, because you will be the one doing the abusing probably, or like you're the majority. So if there's a majority bias or some implicit bias towards the status quo, then it's to your benefit. So it will become a less salient threat. Not because anyone is evil, just because it's not salient. It's just not something that you encounter if you're not already thinking about these things for some reason. And bringing that aspect into the discussion, and also kind of like trying to dial down the FOOM and AGI fear and redirecting the fear towards what you also said you care about in the open source like intro that we had, but like corporations and corporate actors kind of like using various fig leaves to get more market power, to get more like, probably because like corporations are actually like the closest thing to rational actors that we have in this world.
Yeah, you may not remember the talk about open source, and that's because you haven't heard it yet. When Igor and I got on the call, we basically started talking right away. After a minute or two, I started recording, and then at a good break in the conversation, we started the real conversation, which is where you guys came in. So before we throw it back to that beginning portion, here's a brief primer on open source in AI. AI systems don't fit nicely into the pre-existing open source definition, so the organization that maintained the definition started an effort to write a new open source AI definition just before the launch of ChatGPT. Although there is a working version which is publicly available, version 1 of the definition is scheduled to be ready in October of this year. In the meantime, industry movers, especially Meta, have commandeered the term, and attempting to define it in a manner that is decidedly uncharacteristic of actual open source. On top of that, big tech has lobbied for reduced restrictions to open source models, but of course using their new watered-down definition, and not even the working versions made publicly available by the Open Source Initiative. If you're looking for some badass reading material to go along with this section, check out my recent article titled "Open Source is a Lie, but it doesn't have to be," which is, of course, linked in the show notes. Now, take it back now, y'all. I think that the issue that I take with it is that Meta and Mistral, to me, seem to be using the label of open source, which is falsely attributed, in order to garner goodwill with the public and get exemptions in legislation. And so my issue is not, like, I think it's good that it is being open sourced. The reason that I think it's important to bring attention to is because if people don't know about it, there's this false sense of more transparency than there actually is.
Yeah, I agree with you there. My thing of like I'm less worried about is kind of in the sense of like the lesser evil. Like in a world where like I have a feeling that the dominant tenor in the EA and rationalist adjacent AI safety crowd has been kind of like, oh no, shut it all down. The good guys should be the only people having AI, and like the plebs can have the safe APIs that OpenAI produces. In that world where that is still kind of a thing, like I spoke with from FHI a while ago, and it was about stable diffusion. And for him, the possibility of somebody getting CSAM material out of the stable diffusion model without anyone being able to stop them was enough that he was at least more leaning towards, no, I want it all locked down. I want this to be fully like centralized, and the only people who can like run these models are the ones that put a filter afterwards that filters out better content, so nobody gets access to that content. Which I get the thinking behind that, but for me, the market distortion is like the main threat in all of this. And if you have the weights and the code to run it, then you can distill the model and you can try to extract the data set and you can try to probe it a little. So you get like 85% of what you get if you document the full pipeline and you do the full like ML 360 thing where everything is open, which I think should be the standard. Like that's the thing that is like the only thing to have actual transparency is to see the whole sausage being made. It's what like, and I would say it's a trend that is also a thing in general. Like in Germany, where I'm from, there's movements towards like passing transparency laws. So like freedom of information is you get to ask for some information sometimes, and then transparency law is like by default everything is shared, and you need to have a good reason to not make like the whole database at least available via an API for some journalists to just like check whenever they feel like it. And like if you're dealing with algorithmic decision making processes and you want to have any meaningful like accountability via independent checking and any meaningful like what's the fancy word, like fifth estate, like the journalistic like bringing stuff to transparency thing.
I don't know. I'll look it up later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't heard of it.
Like if you want to have that, you need to have really the full. And there was this report recently, this Rotterdam Lighthouse report, where the only reason why they were able to do the investigation is because the city of Rotterdam cooperated with them. So what they did was basically they checked like a bunch of decisions that were being made, a bunch of like classification stuff that was being done by the basically linear regression that was scoring social security recipients for you might be defrauding the state. And they found that like marginalized groups or already weak groups like single mothers and immigrants and so on were being heavily discriminated against for no real reason. Like if you controlled for all of the other aspects and blinded against the sensitive variable, like the actual kind of like relevant, causally relevant information in the data that would be available doesn't show that you should be doing this. And also we have like norms against it. And like the regression just wasn't done correctly. And the only reason why I could actually do this really good like data and AI journalism was because like the Netherlands is quite open and we're trying to do the right thing. But if you now have like a redlining scenario where there is actually like a systemic bias against someone and it's just being filtered through AI algorithms, like you can't do that if you don't have this ML360 thing. So I fully agree with you there. It's just like, if I right now pick my battles and I kind of like try to shut down the discussion about closed source, like if I can choose between making closed source unthinkable, and then we have a mixture of ML360 and open weight models, that's a good outcome for me, and that's the higher priority than the thing where we have some closed models, some open weight models, and some real open source models, kind of.
And that's it for the intro portion, so we're going to hop back in where we left off. Before I tag out, though, I think it's worth priming a concept that Igor mentions: the idea of corporations as artificial intelligence. Now, at first, this may sound super weird to you, as artificial has typically been thought of as based in hardware, but this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. For example, take a colony of ants. Each ant generally follows some set of rules which differ depending on its role, and together the ants work to help the colony survive and flourish. Using a similar abstraction, we can also think of corporations as a system, again where workers operate within some bounds and serve some specific function. Igor is just about to claim that a suitably run corporation can be treated as a rational actor. When combined with the incentive structures that govern them, that is, profit, we can be reasonably certain that each individual company will always pursue the path which rationally will result in generating the most profit, regardless of moral considerations.
But like a suitably run corporation will be kind of a rational actor, so that thing isn't evil, it just profit maximizes because that's what it's built to do.
Yeah.
And so they will use the idea of, oh, there's this hugely dangerous thing coming in the future, you should regulate it, but not too much, and you should only regulate it in a way that doesn't affect our ability to do research, to be the first ones to have it. And then your country, UK, US, will be the first ones to have this hugely dangerous but also very powerful thing. So like that distraction keeps you from just doing stuff like the original, like really sharp version of the AI Act, of basically, no, like just show that it's safe, and you need to be able to explain everything, and you just can't apply this in these cases, no matter how much you promise like the next evolution of phrenology about lie detection and other things. No, you just don't do facial recognition, period. Like stuff like this, like strong regulation gets delayed and weakened because of this like ever growing song of like, oh, but what about this nascent industry which will deliver untold riches for the common man? Really, we should all be grateful for giving all of our data to Meta and OpenAI and Facebook and all of these artists. They will gain so much once Sam Altman's WorldCoin thing takes really off, and you get the UBI from the $1 trillion GPT-10, like whatever. Like this story, it only works if you keep this like miracle of like the super intelligence somewhere. And one very effective way of doing that is by talking about the great risk and needing to do that. And
I was just going to say, it's very reminiscent of, I think, at least how I perceived the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, of like a small group of, the scientific elite or whatever saying like, oh, look, we've got this awesome new technology, and once we get it going, it's going to be the next big thing. It's going to solve all these problems.
We just need a few more $1 billion of investment and a couple of miracles to happen, but it's going to happen any moment now. It's like it's still early.
Yeah.
So let's put a pin into that, because you actually touched on something that I have like thought about a lot, and I think I can say more coherently kind of like isolate that.
Okay.
But another thing I want to kind of open up as a future thread from what Rand was doing is, it is notable that alignment, this idea of like just put the right training mechanism in place and then hopefully the thing will figure out what we want as well, is the only safety mechanism that is indistinguishable from capability boosting. Like the latest OpenAI paper that had this weak to strong generalization thing in there kind of made me realize this. like any other safety mechanism, stuff like formal verification, stuff like fail-safe design, stuff like ODD, something that I'm pushing for the AI safety camp. That's kind of safety by design. That says, okay, you know how we're going to make this safe? By making it safe. Even if we have an angry god inside, this angry god, in one of the cases we're exploring in our project, if you have an angry god inside your server box, but the only input he gets is a pre-sanitized JSON format that you have spent a lot of time thinking about, and the only output he gets is a scalar between -1 and 1, then it is pretty easy to control that angry god, no matter how smart it is. And if you do that, then you have safety by design, but it's boring because then you can't do a thing of giving it access to the internet and have it feel automagical, and you actually need to still leverage this as a tool, and it stays a tool. And formal verification is the same thing. You just need to put in a lot of effort to actually understand things, and you don't get this sudden boost of roll the dice on a 1 the world ends, but on everything else 2 to 6 you get possibly $1 trillion. That is a thing that you get from alignment, and which is basically saying scalable learning feedback. Alignment research is just a rebranding and a reinvention, as is common in these communities, of the idea of you want to use a little bit of training data or a little bit of human feedback, and then amplify it in the way that you intended to scale to something much larger. And so all alignment research and all AI safety research in the direction of alignment is one-to-one capability research, which I think is something that is worth highlighting at the beginning here, and for people interested in this, because I think there's a lot of people who are interested in this for the right reasons, but they should be aware of this, that alignment is the only safety mechanism you can research that is intrinsically a capability booster. Because you can also just use the alignment process to unalign the thing, or to do you put your alignment towards do what I tell you and ignore all of the petty plebeians.
So I think one thing that I think is positive in the current paradigm shift that I'm seeing is I think that people are headed in this direction that you're talking about. So I'm not saying that it's perfect yet, but I do think that people are starting to come around to this idea. For example, Redwood Research recently published a paper, AI Control, Improving Safety Despite Intentional Subversion. And it basically is just here are methods that we can use to make sure that the system doesn't do bad stuff, regardless of whether it wants to or not.
The thing is, if you actually do the reading on this, then what you're then back to is mechanism design, which is a thing that economists have been studying for 50 years now, basically since we had formalized computational economics. And one of my personal research heroes, Michael Jordan.
I'm Michael Jordan. Stop it. Get some help.
Has a paper on this very recently that was literally about this. And the interesting thing is then if you want to have some leeway and some actual autonomy, this type of mechanism design is basically what you need to study formally. And it's really difficult, so it's probably better to just do the AI as tool and enforcement. And I am happy if a community is switching the direction. I still see this, what you talked about, this allure of the unlimited gains as one of the risks here. And unless you want to structure it a bit more, I can go into what I put the pin in, because you had touched on the Bitcoin and AI safety similarity a bit earlier.
Yeah, let's go into that.
So the clean way to just summarize this is that both Bitcoin and the AI safety debate, let's say, or the whole AI field right now, and also on a lesser degree, American style capitalism is built on this idea of speculation, in the sense of the whole economic system, and this is not a criticism yet, the whole economic system is built on this idea, okay, we will we have stuff, and I convince you to loan me your stuff, so I have enough resources to do a thing. So like there's actual value being created if this follows through, because I put in some work to convince you that my idea is good, and then I do the work to make it come to fruition, and then I give you your stuff back, and because you took a risk, you get something back. We can then argue about like justice and who has stuff, but like if we assume like platonic idealized world where everybody actually starts with the same amount of riches in the beginning, this is an okay system. It is actually meritocratic. This is like the idealized thing that the libertarians try to act we're in. And it would actually be fair. Like if we all had the same stuff and there was no disadvantage ever, it was actually just up to like what we decide to do. The problem is that we live in reality where like people who don't look like us, their grandparents were slaves. And like in my case, like my family is Polish and I grew up in Germany, like we were the Untermenschen, we were guest. So like we don't have the same level of generational wealth as some of my German friends. So it's not that we all have this same initialization. And this really goes into politics. You can, I don't want to have a trap, but this is kind of like why like people are critical of capitalism basically. And if you fixed that, the communist and anarcho-capitalist utopias kind of converge. If you have like the idealized capitalism where everybody actually has the same chance and it's all down to personal like preferences, and the perfect communism where somehow we avoid that the central agent like becomes an authoritarian, and we actually do this like to each his own need from each what they can contribute, like the systems would look basically the same. Or if everybody had like a piece of a big ETF that has all of the economy in the world, like something like this.
Sure.
But at the core of this is now this speculation that I have a theory that this will create value, and you also need to speculate with me for this to work. So there's a bias in the system towards needing a certain minimum amount of speculation to work. And that's what we have like laws and by now very sophisticated risk management techniques for. So you can take this type of risk without it just being completely stupid risk. But of course, like we are still monkeys, and there's like our systems can be hacked, and this inherent need for speculation, which because like I connected it to the capitalist thing to show how strongly embedded it is in our like society in a sense. Like you need to have some form of speculation somewhere in the loop. Somebody needs to take a risk. Otherwise, you get stagnation and probably death at some point. Because if you never take any risk, you will probably just like be hemorrhaging what little assets you have by the like attrition of the world. And that's why we have this like baseline need for risk taking and baseline capability of risk taking, but it can be hacked, and it can be hacked through what in the AI and rationalist community is called like Pascal's mugging, like or FOMO. Basically, these are the same thing. If you tell a story of infinite riches, then no matter how small the chance, like this bias towards a little bit of optimism that you need, and which is also like a component of a lot of like provably optimal like online learning and RL algorithms. This bias towards optimism makes you a bit susceptible to grifters who tell you, yes, I have this bridge, and if you give me 50 of your US dollars, then you can have this bridge and you will make untold amounts of money. And they basically hack your implicit decision-making process. And this hack is Pascal's mugging, which means here's a very small probability. It can be arbitrarily small, but the payoff can be scaled up arbitrarily because it's not connected to anything concrete either. So whatever your threshold is, whatever like implicit expected value or conditional value at risk or whatever other risk metric you have, because I can just basically put the payoff to infinite, whatever tiny probability you might buy into, you can justify anything with that. And the way that then plays out is tapping into like the shortcuts that we use to be so hyper optimized in this world by saying, okay, we do quick decisions, we do emotional reasoning, we don't actually model everything and process the whole complexity of the world. we either default to nah as the conservative thing, or oh yes, this is 100%. So there's actually a paper that studied this, and it kind of says like humans don't do probabilities even when reasoning. They do like buckets. They say there's 1, 0, low risk, high risk, and I don't know. That's like kind of like the actual amount of probabilistic reasoning that we do without a pen and paper. And it makes sense because you don't need anything else. And this thing is then hacked here, and like you have like a selection process of people who are desperate for something to give them that payoff, or who had just had like a weak moment, or the social environment, whatever the reasons, you create a buy-in. And then you already bought in, so then you have another selection process. Some people resist the investment fallacy. Some people just double down, and then at some point you have this like radicalized core group of evangelists and proselytes who go around telling everybody of the maybe internally very consistent story of the infinite payoff or infinite drawdown that we just need to invest in or avoid. And this is the core thing of AI safety as well, basically.
Yeah, so just wanting to make sure that this is clear, it can go the opposite way as well. So instead of it being an infinitely valuable payoff, it's an infinitely bad consequence.
Every doomsday cult that has this big dramatic drawdown that you need to stop, like under all circumstances, so like QAnon, for example, any apocalyptic cult is basically the same thing with avoid the bad thing. And ideally, you have both. Ideally, you're this is where we also get into Umberto Eco a bit and the connection to this ur-fascism. The stable endpoint of this for the people that are the most susceptible to it is we are in great peril. We need to do everything to avoid this peril, and if we manage to weather this great peril, then afterwards lies utopia and untold riches. But because we are now binary between complete utopia and infinite gain and complete destruction, whatever we feel is the correct thing to do, or whatever, like our reasoning process that has created this highly binarized, hysterical pseudo reasoning, like whatever that tells us to do, is now like justifiable, basically, like against everything. This is the kind of like purest form of everything, and this is where you get like EY on Twitter, at least, loudly thinking about bombing data centers, for example, where like for that to become a reasonable thing to even like kind of like talk about. Like he didn't advocate for bombing data centers. Like I don't want to strawman him. Like there was like a talk about a threshold at which point bombing data centers would become like a thing that becomes ethical or something like that. And if we include this, then I want to like double check it as well, so I don't strawman him. But like,
absolutely,
like because I actually like EY for like political reasons. He consistently denies Nazis and like eugenics people the validation that they desperately crave from him. But like, so like you get that from that like completely off base and ungrounded thing. Because now if you ground it and you make one simple demand that I always make when I have arguments with AI safety people, which is, show me the mechanistic pathway, like the actual A to Z. Don't hand wave anything, don't skip anything. Just show me how we get from here to whatever AI risk you talk about. And
so before we go on, I want to say, because I know people like also in this community, and I've heard this sort of response to that, because and so I want to say it and then hear what your answer is. Okay, however, if we have this system that is so much more intelligent than us, it doesn't really matter the precise mechanistic way that we get
so
to...
show me one is one of my responses, and then the other one is like you are making a claim. You need to first show me the mechanistic pathway, how A, this thing gets so much more intelligent than us, and B, why that matters. Because like a hot take, not a precise claim, but a hot take, like polemic that I would make, because part of the AI safety propaganda machine is this graph that has the intelligence curve or IQ curve, and you have the amoeba, the monkey, the human, looking at the monkey, silly little monkey, and then it goes exponential, and then somewhere up there is the super intelligence. So that graph is, in my opinion, a naive and fan of research, fan of computer science, whatever version you want to look at it, way of looking at intelligence. If you want the smart take, François Chollet, who doesn't like the AI safety crowd at his status now, has a wonderful monograph called On the Measure of Intelligence, where he has a coherent definition of what you could call intelligence, and that does not admit such a graph because intelligence is always context dependent, and intelligence always includes, in his definition, how much do you put in. It doesn't matter how quickly you can adapt and how much you know. If you needed to process enormous amounts of data to get to that point, and if you need a lot of data to then adapt, and a lot of compute and so on, you're not as intelligent as a system that can do with much less built in. And this is kind of why LLMs, under his definition, are not much smarter than an if-else chain, because they come with so much input that basically anything. Yeah.
Right.
So, but this is assuming intelligence exists for a second. You still need to show how you get there. You still need to just show, okay, how does it get there? And we don't. Our online learning algorithms are horrible. Our RL algorithms are also horrible as soon as your rollout time isn't measured in the milliseconds. Anything that interacts with the real world, the only way to do it is in unsupervised methods. So batch RL or imitation learning, whatever branding you put on that. It's basic always imitation learning. And then we see that even the best self-amplification methods that we have for LLM and for unsupervised learning methods like Dino and so on, what they get is what's in the data. So you don't exceed anything. You just distill it and industrialize it. So if your threat model of intelligence is not, if I have an army of arbitrarily many but finite interns who are, in German we have this word Fachidiot. It's kind of a very smart person, but only on a very specific thing, a person who can only do one thing, specialist idiots. If your threat model doesn't show me how this army of specialist idiots is world-destructingly capable, then you have failed to kind of show the mechanistic pathway, even if I give you that we get there somehow, which is there's a wonderful book by Michio Kaku, I think. It's called The Physics of Superheroes, and he has this term that he calls swallowing the toad. If you swallow a single toad on every popular superhero, they're usually logically internally consistent and kind of plausible. There's one exception you need to give them, and then they work out. So here we need two toads already. We're beyond Superman, basically. This is not even the full chain of logic that you need to actually go through to establish risk. Because you need to show that we can get to super high intelligence. You need to show that this actually matters. Maciej Tchaikovsky, he has this talk, Superintelligence, the idea that eats smart people, and he presents it in a very funny way, just basically being mean to people. But his points more or less stand. He has then this thing of the argument from Stephen Hawking's cat, which is, no matter how smart Stephen Hawking is, he cannot get his cat into his litter box if the cat doesn't want to, because he's Stephen Hawking and he can't move. And the thing that made humans formidable predators and alpha predators and just hugely destructive world is partially our intelligence, but it's also intelligence plus thumbs plus sweating plus gate, there's a lot of additional factors. And I'm pretty sure if you take away the intelligence, like a bunch of IQ points, and you have only kind of like let's say we hard cap at medieval ages, we were already causing like massive ecosystem extinction at that point without any form of like super intelligence. It's like if you just have like some basic adaptiveness plus the right like robotics, that's the killer app. And like this is like the series of counters that I have to these people, because like this argument, it doesn't matter how exactly, then show me one, just a single one. Actually give me a single one, because usually you can poke holes into all of them, even the bioterrorism risk, which is the one that I have kind of like felt as the most likely one. There's still a lot of holes in like the intelligence being the main factor. Like there are some people who really worry about this. I think it's good that we worry about this. I think there's genuine case for like this might be a thing that causes like a whoopsie extinction. I think the other one is climate change. Both of these things, AI is not the issue unless you go to the level of like capitalism, the society is an algorithm. If you insist on keeping it on what I call like silicon intelligence, or like technical artifacts that have some direct impact, like they are not nil, but they are on the level of talking about like financial product deregulation, or laws being changed. The main innovation that LLMs have brought is, hey guys, plagiarism is legal now. You just need to filter it through this LLM compression algorithm. That's the main technical like contribution that they do to enable all of this. So this was like a bit ranty response to it doesn't matter how we get the superintelligence.
Again, I don't think I prescribe to this chain of thought personally, but I think this is what someone who was really into AI safety as like or rather really in the doomerism camp would say, okay, but if I can't make up a path that gets to the extinction, but maybe I'm just not intelligent enough, and these systems would be.
Maybe I'm a walking god and you're just not smart enough to recognize my divinity, and therefore you should give me all your stuff. This is again like it's a recursive Pascal smugging. Like it's already this thing. This is like this is why I mean it's a hack. It's like you have this basic willingness to accept things without evidence, and you have this basic like willingness of accepting threats. And then, because for you, it feels like there's no more pressing threat. Usually, again, like we said, you're white and male and at least middle class or up. So like for you, this might feel like an interesting and worthwhile pressing possibility that is actually more important than global warming because you're not going to drown. But like this is not a logical argument. This is a kind of God of the gaps argument. This is, but you can't disprove it. So checkmate. Checkmate atheists. You need to show the mechanism. If you fail to show the plausible mechanism, then rationally, you shouldn't really do a thing, especially. So like there's one thing where you could argue, but principle of caution, which is always the kind of like shield they hide behind. Principle of caution is not like universal thing. We don't do principle of caution against everything. We weigh the risks because we have a limited budget. So principle of caution would also need to be applied to maybe we're hugely underestimating the impact of climate change, which it looks like we are because we keep writing like papers that actually this is going to be much worse, guys, and it's going much faster. We're not fucked, but we should be doing much more. If you apply this principle of caution, you need to apply it consistently, and it basically kind of just like raises all of the risks by a bunch, and the ones where you have evidence of you underestimating things a lot. And in AI safety, evidence kind of says we get lucky all the time because like the fact that neural networks work at all and they kind of do what we want. Means like accidental alignment is a thing. Adversarial examples, like the fact that our models are so brittle that if you just do gradient descent on the input space, you find things that completely break them. But on the average case, they still work, means that like on average, these things seem to just work how we want them to without even trying. As long as you train on stuff that you considered important, i.e., Google example again, your group of white guys trains them on image classifiers and they get good results, and then it classifies black people as gorillas because no black person was in the room when the thing was evaluated. There's evidence to indicate that we seem to be getting lucky all the time. So far, there's no evidence, despite lots of hunting for it, that we like get unlucky.
Not sure if you remember this, but in 2015, the image classifier that Google Photos used in order to auto-label images output that 2 black people were gorillas. While of course Google was apologetic and stated that they would take immediate action, when he asked how this could have happened in the first place. But of course, the question was rhetorical and the answer was clear. Development and testing of the system had not been diverse. Perhaps more funny, worrisome, or both is that Google's seeming long-term fix for this was just to prevent the system from labeling anything as a gorilla. Of course, this also ties in with the much more recent story centered around the release of Google Gemini. Many claim that the AI system had disproportionate representation of non-white individuals during image generation, which I would argue is probably not actually that important. Even if it is true, because minorities have always had disproportionate representation in the media. So, like, share the love a little bit? I don't know. The argument that did gain traction, however, was that Gemini was generating historical inaccuracies by depicting, for example, Black and Asian Nazi soldiers. As someone who has worked with image models, I think it would be incredibly difficult to ensure any semblance of diversity in some image generations, while others stick rigidly to predefined tropes. My hot take on this is just blatantly state that historical images won't reflect race, and then if you really feel like you're missing some large portion of your intended use case, link to a different set of image models that are fine-tuned on specific historical contexts. But, I don't know, that's just my opinion. As the theme for today's episode is long, I figured I'd tack on another aside and a half here as well. This one is on emergence, which will come up in just a little bit. I also recently wrote an article on the term's use in the domain of machine learning as well, and as you might expect, I think it's quite a banger. And it is linked in the show notes, but here's the gist. Emergence has 2 primary meanings: its dictionary definition, the fact of something becoming known or starting to exist, and a domain-specific keyword related to complex systems, which is applicable to the study of evolution and adaptation, pattern formation, game theory, and even more. A recent blog post from Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology, or CSET, was titled Emergent Abilities in Large Language Models, an Explainer. Of course, I don't think it's the best article that's been recently published on emergence, but yeah, well, you get it. Anyways, this article says that systems which exhibit emergence are those that cannot be explained simply by looking at their parts, such as complex social networks or colonies of ants, bees, and termites. In addition to these 2 definitions, a third, distinct idea has emerged within the past few years: the term emergent as a machine learning specific keyword. According to the paper I reviewed earlier this year titled Large Language Models, a Survey, which was authored by leaders in the field of machine learning, emergence is a key differentiator between large language models and their smaller predecessors, pre-trained language models. At the same time, however, the primary definition that has been accepted within the field of machine learning was written by Jason Wei et al. In the paper Emergent Abilities of Large Language Models as, quote, "An ability is emergent if it is not present in smaller models, but is present in larger models," unquote. This is a circular definition. While it does seem that the term is rooted in the meaning from complex systems, the currently accepted definition is not anywhere near the level of nuance required for such an idea. I argue that because advanced machine learning systems are going to have substantial effects on society, every effort should be made to remove potential sources of confusion or misunderstanding. And that means no longer using emergence for the machine learning specific definition that has cropped up within the past few years, and being extremely precise when using the root emerge in machine learning articles, regardless of whether it is being used for its dictionary definition or as the complex systems keyword. On a similar note, we are just about to get into deception, and like many concepts within machine learning, I think it warrants explicit and purposeful definition. One example that I would like to promote, as I think it pays the appropriate amount of attention to the importance of clarity, is Apollo Research's blog post, Understanding Strategic Deception and Deceptive Alignment, which draws lines regarding what strategic deception and deceptive alignment mean.
And even the recent LLM examples, if you read all of these papers, all of the, we got this thing to lie, the setup is always we create a scenario in which an autocomplete engine will create what is in character falsehoods. And then it does. Mm-hmm. So
right.
Yeah, sure. What do you expect? And Dan Hendricks, this one I was shaming him for, we had an exchange on this because they have a reference to the Cicero paper in the class material for his thing that I did. And I asked him, hey, you say you found emergent deception in this paper. That's weird. In the paper, they say other things. And then they say, we had an intern go through the logs and it found a case of deception. And then I asked, okay, so was this emergent? Was this trained on fully filtered deception? And did it learn to do that as part of the RL step? Or was this something they just picked up from leaks in the data set? And I didn't get any answers. There's a bunch of other things as well of did this happen in the LLM stage or in the RL stage? Because you can also imagine the LLM kind of defaulting into deception by accident, and then they redefine deception in a later paper where we talk about AI deception. That you wanted to talk about the Stakeout AI founder who I like that guy and he's an author on the paper, mm-hmm. But what I don't like is that they redefine deception as just anything that makes a human get a wrong idea of what is actually true. If a right. model kind of plausibly looks like it functions, but there's actually something else going on, then they say that is deception. And I wouldn't call that deception. That's just ambiguity. And
right.
So you need to be very clean about your words when you study these types of things. And they continuously try to phrase it in the worst possible way, like the misgeneralization paper. Langusco et al. And Lee Sharkey is one of our authors, and I like both these people. They're friends of mine, at least for now. What they found is just failure to generalize. It is you train your RL model, but on a thing where the coin is always in the upper right corner, and you don't have sufficient variation for it to learn that the coin can be somewhere else sometimes. And then it navigates to the upper right corner, even if the upper right corner is far away. Yeah, because the simplest feature that you could learn for that is upper right corner, not anything else. So what do you expect? And phrasing that as an example of some unknown hazard is phishing. And it's being fished for because of this effect that I said earlier, that people go into this field not as researchers with an interesting research question, but they need to save the world. It's right. and that means you don't do the kind of even the better ones. There was some papers that did this truth probing, even those they try a bit for ablations, but then even the reviewers and people on r/machine learning have but what about this? What was alternative explanations, and then usually those are the ones that it latched onto, because bombastic claims it learned a world model or it learned truth from unsupervised training usually isn't the case on its own, and you need some solid evidence to make it claim, because so much counter evidence.
So this brings up, we've mentioned this a couple times, so I want to take the pin from earlier about intelligence. and whether that exists at all. And then also just this idea of, I think that an issue that I've had trouble with for a long time, like before I knew anything about AI safety, it was just that the words that are being used to describe these phenomena, like artificial intelligence, for example, I think is sort of one of my least favorite terms.
Yes.
And yet it's in the name of the podcast because it's become so ubiquitous. And it's what, gets people going.
It gets the people going.
But calling the systems that we have now artificial intelligence, it brings so much inherent baggage to the conversation of like personifying these systems and being able to put blame and like other sort of really human things onto these systems just because of the words that we're saying around it. And because those words are sensationalistic, they're the ones that are used, since again, that's like hacking the human brain. We're using these sensational words to try to get more attention on our research because we want more attention on our research. But then that sort of spirals out of control. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and what you talked about earlier with intelligence.
So there are people who are much smarter than me where I draw from, and I want to like drop some of them for like this section. One is Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, where she coins the term like large computational systems. I think it is LCS, because that is like a more accurate thing of what we're doing.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Another and Atlas of AI is basically making my case more eloquent with references and like additional dimensions, like the power dynamics spelled out. Francois Chollet's on the measure of intelligence I mentioned already. Another paper that I found is like factoring human intelligence, something like that. That looked into like a twin study and like of like, can you actually find that intelligence factor, that Spearman correlation G factor that like the eugenics crowd loves to point to as a thing that is like heritable and the thing that drives like that defines IQ. Like, can you find that consistently? And the answer is kind of no. Like, there's like if you look at different skills on a wide study and you correct for like environmental factors, like at least this thing finds that there is no single like factor that could explain that because like it's basically contradicting. There's no linear correlation anywhere, and that for me is the state of the actual world that also Francois Chollet kind of like argues for in his thing, that intelligence, if you have any useful kind of like definition of it, is at best a kind of summarizing descriptor that needs to be differentiated from a kind of positive quality. There's also the difference between like a metric and a diagnostic that is important here. That is like some things are metrics, they measure things that actually exist, and if you bring the metric up, the underlying thing also goes up. And then there are like proxy metrics, surrogates, diagnostics that have all different purposes that might correlate with what you want to do to some degree, but they're just not the same thing. So, for example, the grades or the IQ is actually maybe a useful number if you're a psychologist and you want to figure out why a kid is struggling. Because a low IQ is a easy marker to trigger off, they might have some cognitive development disability. They might have something that has like impaired their ability to function in this world, and we should check what that is. So that's why it's a diagnostic, but it's not a causal factor. It's not that you can from this say, this kid is just stupid, like bring him to the like post-infant eugenics facility and like put him out of his misery. Like that's not the causal chain that you have established. Intelligence, this concept, if you look into the history of it, if we start with the G factor, like Spearman and so on, that was literally eugenics. Like the crowd that developed the statistical measurements around intelligence. I need to double check this, but I think Spearman's doctoral father was basically a eugenicist. There's this book called Palo Alto, A History of Silicon Valley by Malcolm Harris. It's where I learned how deeply entrenched this is, because also like William Shockley, one early dean of Stanford University, were also like foundational contributors to eugenic theory. And this idea of like elite selection by finding them early and bringing out the latent factors that indicate greatness, like they were big proponents of that. It was called the Palo Alto system in the book. So this is the kind of background from which we get our concepts of intelligence. And if you dig into that further, is in the kind of like framing of Piketty and his book Capital and Ideology, it serves a function of justifying the current system. Because in this book, like part of the main idea is that every system always has an ideology that tells you why it's okay. Because every system is imperfect, and you need to somehow justify to yourself why this particular imperfect system is the one you choose over the alternatives, or why you don't fix the thing that is broken. And in capitalism in the West, but also in a lot of other places, like in aristocratic things, there's usually at some point a trend of these people deserve it. Like it's their own responsibility, and depending on how far you go, they are just doomed to be like that. Like it's just they're inherently doomed to be like that. There's nothing you can do. And like that's the line of argument that then gave rise to the bell curve by Murray Rothbeard, I think his name is, which is just like eugenics drivel and has been debunked by the last name I'm going to drop, which is like a YouTuber called Sean. It's like a 3-hour video where he really just goes step by step through a book and debunks every claim and makes like very like layman-friendly arguments. And the main thing is that intelligence is at best this emergent property that describes basically functioning in the world with a component of adaptivity kind of at the forefront, because that seems to be the most important thing in our society. And it used to be that other things were more important. So they were the thing that was used by the ruling class as the justification. So like maybe strength, maybe like charisma, maybe something else. But like whatever justifies the status quo becomes the ideological like foundation and the good thing in your current system. And intelligence serves that purpose, and has lost the actual kind of like useful status as a descriptor of a summary of like there's a bundle of skills that all together we call intelligence. Alternatively, just be rich. Be born into a rich family, and you will have no lack of sycophants who come up with a way why you're actually really smart. And that's the actual thing of intelligence. That's why like intelligence on its own is really what exists are cognitive skills, individual cognitive skills. Like I have ADHD. I have a specific impairment of like executive function of deciding where my brain looks. And if I take the right med, that impairment is slightly lifted. In the same way that if you have like a broken leg, you have an impairment of your running skill. And if you do the right physio, you will restore that to the baseline and get better at it. And if you train one cognitive skill, you get better at that one cognitive skill. And we have no evidence that training like a single thing makes you better at any other thing, which is what would be expecting if there was like a single G factor. What is there's enabling factors where if you can't read and you can't math, then learning to read is good, learning to math is good, learning to read and math unlocks you a combo. So there's a combinatorial effect. But that is a very different thing than there being an underlying causal effect. If you were to lay out the causal diagram, then you have like a bunch of independent variables that recombine into a bunch of dependent skills. whereas the intelligence concept of like the positive idea of intelligence, it exists as a thing in the world, would imply that all of these independent factors are actually just dependent factors of a single quantity that the eugenicists would love to tell you is hereditary and genetic, and whichever thing they identify has the most of it. That is a crucial input into the expression of these skills. And then like the sufficiently cultured ones will tell you it's also about expression, it's also about money, it's also about all these other things. But really, the genes are also really important, and they're more important than money, for example. And talent always shines through. And I personally disagree. I don't think we have like enough evidence to make any conclusive thing there yet. But what I know is that there's no evidence for the eugenicist case, basically. And there's a bunch of evidence that if you want to do one thing for a hypothetical child to guarantee them a good place in this world, have them be born rich. Like rich parents make up for a lot of other stuff. So this is the intelligence part in relatively slow but completion. And then the artificial part starts off with that faulty thing that like intelligence doesn't exist, so there's no single thing to learn from. What exists, if you look into multitask RL, is correlation between specific tasks. And if you look into, hopefully, if current paper goes through, one of my papers and the ones we cite in there, there's compositional support, i.e., you might not have a text that describes how to do A to Z, but you might have a text that describes A to K, and you might have a video that tells you how to go from H to Z. And then that overlap allows you to stitch it together, and now you have like a guidance to go from A to Z. So like that exists. So training on more stuff helps you collect all of that stuff and condense it, but it's not like multimodal LLMs raise their G factor by just strengthening one capability thing. You just have that bag of tricks in the mix at the level that you see in the data, plus some generalization that we can more or less reason about by now, despite what some people tell you. Like, where like this is like a controversial statement, like the random feature model and a bunch of theoretical things give you good intuition on what you should expect from a given ML model, all things being equal. If you then do some tweaks and some data engineering and some other stuff, you can go way beyond them, and they don't have like as strong predictive power as we have for gravity, for example. But there's an upper bound and a lower bound, and like an expected kind of like thing for impossible that you can reasonably do on any given system that you can dream up. And so far, the big kind of surprise from my perspective, and this is like in my community, is just that like we can train these things, and like how easy kind of like it is to find like good, useful surrogates. But it doesn't mean that these surrogates are like recreating human intelligence or are becoming, and like this is not just a humans are special argument. There's like technical things that are different, like where quick off the cuff example is like LLM is sequential, human thought isn't. We can recreate this in theory. It's not nothing special, but it's just not in the architecture. It's just not in the training thing that we're doing right now. And if we move towards that, then maybe we get more human level capabilities, but then it also becomes less easy to scale because it requires you to actually do multiple rollouts and then look at them jointly. So there's no free lunch again. And that's kind of it. You have this initial faulty conception of a single factor of like the magic IQ thing that somehow makes you a super person, and we have established that you don't have a mechanistic pathway to get to that. Then from that faulty kind of view onto the world, we get nowadays this talk AI, that really is like a marketing thing through and through that latches onto that prestige of intelligence, because selling just computer vision and selling just algorithms or programs like dynamic programming and is just much more boring than reinforcement learning, because learning is something that we can, like I said, anthropomorphize, whereas programming is something that we understand. Like you get this chain of things, and then you get what I touched on, these like fans of AI or fans of computer science who do the work and are competent and all of this, but like they go into this and get the competence with the goal of already saving us from the doom AI, or like this vague feeling around it, and they then write papers where they conflate definitions. They ascribe like emergent effects to of like capability emergence to LLMs, where like not the original papers, like the original like emergent abilities of LLMs, I don't think they are in the community, but like the community ate that paper up. And there was follow-up papers around it. Basically, yeah, like in context learning, like removes a lot of that emergent look, even though like it's already kind of badly defined, and like you don't see emergence if you just plot it differently, which then kind of makes me think like, what are you talking about? We're talking about a different universe, and my Occam's razor explanation is that you desperately, at some level, want the emergence to be there because it would justify the investment that you've put in. This is like putting stuff into people's like mouths that is not necessary to do. But I say this really from like a perspective of somebody who tries to understand why people put so much effort and anguish. Like people get depressed about this. People like justify like not horrible things, like justify real potential harm with this thing that there's no evidence for. Like I don't understand it.
Okay, so we did talk about this AIxBio stuff a good bit in the episode with Spider-Man, Dr. Park, but there have been a number of recent studies which warrant an update. So first, both OpenAI and RAND both conducted research to evaluate whether or not access to LLMs, in addition to the internet, as it exists today, was enough to significantly lower the implicit knowledge barrier for planning a biological attack. Although OpenAI's study should be taken with a grain of salt, as the company is financially incentivized to downplay the capabilities of LLMs in order to reduce and postpone regulation, both RAND and OpenAI found that there was not a statistical difference between performance of teams with access to LLMs and the internet compared to teams which only had access to the internet. Although this risk should continually be reassessed as additional scaffolding frameworks, tooling, and models are released, it does provide evidence towards the idea that, right now, LLMs do not increase the marginal risk of biological attacks from malicious actors. If you're interested in this stuff and haven't listened to my interview with Peter, give it a listen and or check out the resources I link on the topic in that episode's show notes. Yeah. I guess so for Emergence, this was something that I looked into really in depth during the summer, and I think that it's really interesting because I think that, it basically feels like the framing of the property that's being measured is often what results in quote unquote emergence. Like if you were to frame that property in a different way, it wouldn't necessarily be emergent. And so I think that's something that, and it had felt for a while there, at least, that had sort of started to go away. People saying that something was emergent as like a property in a system, but now it's I think it's been referenced in a pretty recent paper. It was at least mentioned in the talk about this paper, the sleeper agents
that one
paper by Anthropic. And when Emergence was brought up, my thought was just like, okay, but how else could we think about this property? And it feels like that's not really being addressed.
So I have a reframing that I think is a useful one, which like there's two types of like more precise words that you can put on emergence. One of them is a phase transition. Is like you have one regime, and then you hit a threshold, and there's a critical point, and then you're in another regime.
Okay.
Like, I think that would be the most accurate thing for what they mean. There's like, below a certain point, you don't see a behavior, and then something changes, and then you go. And this is something we sometimes see in ML. Like, there's the interpolation threshold. Like, that is actually like an effect that is interesting, also from a like theoretical perspective.
Okay. Yes.
Because it implies some threshold is being reached. The other way that is not as cleanly mapping onto, I think, the same like idea is basically just like a very slow gain of capability that sneaks up on you, kind of that like it is completely predictable. It is just very difficult to detect early on, and then like either because your input scales like a power law or the effect itself is like a power law, there's the risk of you being surprised by it. A third one was kind of talked about in a paper by my friend Lee, like the affordance paper by Apollo Research, like AI affordances, and like it's kind of about like if you give an agent different capabilities just like by design, then they might recombine in ways you didn't expect. There's like kind of this combinatorial effect. And there's a wonderful paper that, again, like remind me, I will dig it up for you afterwards, that actually looked at the Industrial Revolution from this perspective. That like they basically say like Industrial Revolution happens once you have enough individual innovations that they can trigger like a innovation cascade by recombining things. So I think that is also like a useful thing to give, like, and something that you might argue happens in AI systems at some point, and then we might be fucked. Like this idea of like, oh, once we have vision and text and reasoning and these other things, then it can be recombined in novel ways. It's like, yes, but then we're already doomed because companies exist and they do this recombination of specialist skills, and they do like very potent capabilities that are combined in novel ways, and they're also artificial systems. So the difference is like the abstraction level and the time scale, but not on a like conceptual level, and it completely kind of subsumes any individual ML model, because even if you do the AI safety thing and now you like factor out the capabilities and you do like modular stuff and everything is mechanistically interpretable, the company that owns these models can still recombine them and act as like the emergent agent again. So
yeah, and just going back to the second item, I think one important thing that I would like to highlight, which I think maybe isn't really being considered in any camp here, is that description of emergence. So emergence not as something that like all of a sudden appears, but as something that we didn't notice to be slowly improving until it reached some sort of phase transition, at least in what we were looking at. And it now is behaving substantially differently than it did before. Like, that's still a problem, and that should still be addressed.
I would counter that with, we only see this stuff when we're specifically set out to do it. Like OpenAI didn't train GPT and then suddenly it started doing stuff. It's like a hammer has the emergent capability of hammering a nail into a wall or into a book or into a person's head or into the ground. Like, that's not emergent capabilities of hammers. That's different hammer usage. We don't like we don't train these models, and then suddenly we deploy them, and suddenly they're way better than we thought. Like there's an upper and a lower bound, because these are artificial systems. We have an idea when we build them. They don't train if you don't have an idea when you build them. So,
yeah, that I definitely agree with.
So like this risk of, but it might still happen that we get some emergent. No, like, because like if you don't ask for it, at least so far, it just doesn't appear. It only appears in toy RL examples that you set up to appear that way because you did things you would never do. And like even in the stuff where it might plausibly appear, like DeepMind does wonderful work on like applied game theory, but like that still has like these limitations I said earlier. But like, yeah, this only works if you have the ability to do batch size 1 million in finite time. If you're forced to do this algorithm on the real world, where like simple case, like let's say your threat model is biotech, like biotech needs at least a few minutes before you get any data back. So you're not gonna like super intelligence your way into biotech by doing 1 million samples every 5 minutes and then doing one forward backwards pass, and you need 1 million of them. Like that mechanistic threat model where you have the capability of something actually emerging without you having explicitly designed it in, because you're doing a reinforcement learning algorithm which has the expressive power for that, is buffered by all of the other stuff.
So I guess what I'm saying is not that it's like a technical problem necessarily. I just mean to be aware of it. Like basically be aware of what you're asking for. It's another framing of the specification problem, and just making sure that the designers are actually specifying the problem well and like understand I guess what the potential like results are.
But like, so like I would even push back against this. Like I agree with you on like this like misspecification problem, but like all of the risk that is actually kind of like a surprise, that like people got Facebook and they share the data freely, and then Cambridge Analytica happened, and now nobody wants to share the data freely anymore, and Facebook has to do a lot of engineering to make sure that like they get our data but nobody else. Because so like that was not something about like the platform developing a capability and the platform kind of like causing harm directly. It was about the people making use of capabilities, and this kind of eternal game that we humans play in the social level, like that had a new dimension. And I agree, that is the interesting thing, but it's completely removed from the AI safety debate, because it's the same same thing if you again like change a law a tiny bit, or you just bring out a new product, you have do a new marketing campaign, and you have coined a new phrasing for something that is a bit harmful. Like it's old problems. Like on a previous podcast with Zoe Kramer, like we made the claim that all of these are old problems and they're being sold as new problems, but they're old problems. And that's why I'm kind of pushing against even the hint of like, oh, this emergence thing might still be something to worry about. Because no, it's just like technology, the concept of technology, or the concept of something new. If you have anything new, then you want the people to bring the new thing to price in the externalities. So easy fix for all of your hypothetical AI risk things: make like the vendor liable for everything that happens with a machine in the absence of like society agreed on like liability limitation. That like OpenAI is just responsible for everything bad that happens with ChatGPT, even if they put research on top of it. If you put that, research slows down massively, which, if you believe in AI safety, like AGI story, is a good thing. And B, like the transfer of risk becomes very explicit now. Like you can, like You'll still have a capitalist incentive to use stuff that is powerful, but now you will want indemnity. Like OpenAI will sell to people who give them indemnity and who take on the liability. And then these people do the same thing.
Sure. I guess so. The reason that I think it's worth pointing out is just that what you mentioned, where people are designing, like in an arbitrary field, people are designing and doing research with knowledge and consideration of externalities. I think that's not the case in many.
But this is a society thing. Again, the only interesting problem
Right.
is principal agent and good governance.
So and like that's sort of what I like am trying to go towards myself, is trying to promote solutions to that problem. Yeah. Let's say that I am just really interested in these machine learning algorithms and the AI systems that have been created. I'm not incentivized by EA, doomerism, or anything like that. I just like, this is a really interesting problem to me. I think pointing out that there is, like, we should still be considering these externalities is not a bad thing. I guess that's the first.
It massively matters on how you point it out, though. Timnit Gebru and the AIFX crowd have been pointing out these externalities like way before like AI safety got mainstream popular, and she was fired for pointing out an externality that, hey, these stochastic parrots might not be worth all of the carbon we are emitting. So when people say, oh, but it's still worth doing, we're not in a vacuum. Like, this is something that I wanted to bring in as well. AI safety was bootstrapped by Peter Thiel and other rich tech bros who are sometimes eugenics adjacent, then some nice tech bros as well, like Dustin Moskowitz and OpenPhil Foundation, and like a bunch of like very scrupulous EAs who are like basically partially tricked into this Pascal smuggling of, you should be giving your money to MIRI, a like institution with output on less than your average like 4 people research lab at like a top 200 university, but 10 times the funding. Like maybe I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but I don't think I'm that far off in orders of magnitude. Like people are being tricked by these but maybe arguments into like enabling and accepting things that are themselves not at all risk neutral. This is not a principle of caution thing. Like, if we do the trade-off of like allowing OpenAI to do their thing, or allowing Anthropic to do their thing, and to create like the reality of the technology is already there, it's widely deployed, banning it would disturb people's workflows, so they get a grandfather exception, then they will have succeeded in kind of the tech grifters gambit of just break rules before they can strongly regulate you and delay active regulation to gain market share. And then you can pay back the lawsuits with the billions you made afterwards because you will have already cashed out. And this creates real risks as well that are externalities that they don't consider. Like, OpenAI does not actually like consider externalities of people like using their thing, because they made ChatGPT long before like the open source ML stuff was like widely deployed. Like, people had access like part of the open source boom was because they opened ChatGPT and they didn't consider that people would just share their chat logs and then retrain models. Like I don't know what happened there. I think this was part of the like product startup playbook as my best explanation. But like, if you actually care about this type of thinking, then the people that talk the loudest about it don't care. Even Dan Hendricks joined the X.com Grok team, and maybe the fact that Grok is refusing to be as right-wing as Elon Musk wants to be is due to him, in which case, thank you, Dan. But like, the people that talk the loudest about like the AI safety framing of it, and who get the billionaire funding, and who have been able to bootstrap this field from nothing, I got $500 for participating in this class of Dan Hendricks. That is unheard of. Like no other academic like field that has like impact on the same scale can afford to pay hundreds of people $500 of a stipend for a summer class worldwide from a non-profit org and a young professor. Like that is only possible because there's so much money in this, because it's attractive to corporate actors and billionaires who fund one type of externality consideration, which is the AI doom, and the bad people have access to the AI type, and they don't fund Timnit. Like Timnit Gebru's brand of externality consideration of like marginalized people, of like, which I assume like you also care about, a lot of people care about. Like
yes, absolutely.
That stuff isn't funded in the same way because it actually impacts these people. Because as I said, alignment and the type of externalities that are being loudly discussed in the actual AI safety crowd is like the only stuff that is scary enough to get people into this Pascal's mugging, but also gives you this utopian payoff. And I also want to say, like, kind of the lucky exception around this is when actually the people that are like true believers. So like I like EY, Eliezer Witkowski, and like the AGI moratorium crowd, for example, because at least it's internally consistent. Like the AGI moratorium and, for example, Stakeout AI and like the founder, Peter S. Park, like, again, I respect them. Like, from what I can see, they are like talking the talk, they are walking the walk, and they're not doing the bullshit. We need to do this really dangerous thing in order to prevent the really dangerous thing. They just say, stop it. Just stop it. So they're not in this Pascal's mugging as well, if you realize. They might have bought into the superintelligence part, but they've retained like the rationality of realizing, oh, wow, we really shouldn't do this. And like, in the AI safety community, like the reason why for me the AI safety community and also the AI community and Silicon Valley as a whole is another instantiations of this speculation-driven like self-deception Pascal's mugging that Dan also has identified in these other like more weirder communities, but it's the same kind of underlying kind of structure, is that it doesn't matter what the logic is. The only thing that matters is we will build AI and we will get filthy rich of it.
Right. It's the ends justify the means.
But like in a distributed ideological way, in a way that is also bad for the people inside of it. That's why people get so depressed and burned out from it and are genuinely scared about things. Even though nowadays, like they like to downplay it, but like Rocco's basilisk was a thing in that crowd. Like that wasn't a thing that was like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, so stupid, let's meme about it. Like from what I saw when that went down, when I was lurking on these forums, and from what you can still find like in what records have survived, this was talked about just as seriously as we talk about, hey, maybe eugenics is not a bad idea if you do it in a nice way, or like maybe this superintelligence thing is a dangerous thing. Like the same level of seriousness that people talk about, like Nick Bostrom's Black Pill paper, was the thing with Rocco's basilisk. This a causal AI reaches back in time to torture people that don't bring it to existence earlier, and like if you have that as the kind of like intellectual legacy as the driving factor at the core, and you have this many people kind of coming in and out and burning out, what survives is just this basic message of like, AI is inevitable. If it isn't, we will make it inevitable. And the people that survive are the ones that somehow benefit from this. And they might be nice people, but they're still being part of this very harmful, self-replicating movement themselves, which like, because I look at things from this like multiple level of abstractions thing, and I'm not saying this is the correct way, it's just like what to explain how I look at it. It looks like to me like that's like the Moloch that they like to cite from the Scott Siskind blog post, and like what leftists would call like, you know, like the capitalist machine or the capitalist system. Like that's what they mean when they talk about the AI going amok, but because like the path dependence, where look at things kind of dictates that it must be silicon based in the same way that for the Decentraland people in Dan Olson's The Future is a Dead Moral, for them like metaverse means 3D like virtual reality goggles. Like if you don't have that, it's not the metaverse. And so AI safety, if the AI isn't a neural network nowadays, or before that, if it isn't something on a computer that runs, then it's not really AI, and it's somehow not the end of the world, but the like democratic backsliding that we see, like the algorithm of democracy being potentially hacked also with AI, but we don't need that. Just money is enough. Like like ads in their existence, the fact that we allow people to put ads onto people to affect their behavior like in a industrial fashion, and manufacturing consent, manufacturing viewpoints. And we have had made our funding mechanism for other content as well, like educational content is being funded like either through somehow being useful for like the companies that make profit, so i.e. being useful for giving people who already have power more profit, and or literally just like being attention grabbing, clickbait. Like you need to somehow compete in the attention economy if you want to make educational content on YouTube, for example. Like the fact that we allow that is part of this algorithm being like hijacked and misaligned, and it's not at all in the externality debate. It's or maybe it is a little bit, but massively downplayed. And in my kind of bubble, where I look at this as a researcher who sees LLM papers coming into NeurIPS, who basically just like query ChatGPT with different templates and then say they have detected falsehoods and therefore ChatGPT is deceptive. Like that is like genuine, like harmful of allowing kind of the faulty reasoning to exist, which is part of why I'm kind of doing this, because I want people to be like much more skeptical. The only way to not fall into this trap, or one of the only ways, I'm not saying I know the answer here, but like for me, the only way you can escape this like illogical rabbit hole is you don't do the first toad, which is like accepting this Pascal's mugging or accepting this like infinity sign, and you ask for that single mechanistic pathway. And if you don't have it, then you need to ask for the justification. Okay, but why is this then different than all of these other speculative things where we have much more evidence? And then they usually cite like the expert surveys, but like on other risk, we have things that are much better than expert service. We have like actual evidence of the mechanistic process underlying it, and we have counterexamples like in this field. So that's not really an argument. That's just like the shape of an argument. So this is kind of like how I would tie this all together, and why I don't think it's enough to say it's worth thinking about the externalities, because people did. And the tech bros didn't care, and it only became a thing once the tech bros found a way to do the bad thing and use the externalities as a justification for doing it. And when people did the actual things that avoid the harm, it doesn't get the same level of support. And the people who then funded this whole bootstrapping operation, some of them have genuine, like altruistic, or at least like rich people altruistic ideas. Some of them have agendas. Like Peter Thiel has an agenda with every investment he does. His whole thing is the libertarian grift of like dilute the stuff of a state that constrains the powerful people, and then capture the part that isn't diluted yet. He's the libertarian who owns Palantir, that is like the state surveillance agency. So like he founded this stuff. And Scott Siskind, who I mentioned, like there are screenshots floating around on Imgur and other things where, if I get to quote this correctly, he basically says like the biological diversity, or like biodiversity crowd, is like human biodiversity crowd, a euphemism for scientific racism crowd, is plausibly correct, or at least not definitely incorrect. Something like this is in the emails, together with a bunch of citations to flat out, full on, like black people are inferior scientific racists, and like to my knowledge, he has never disclaimed this, and there's a whole like small subset of internet that kind of like, because they are triggered by it, dissects the kind of writing style and kind of like dog whistle style misrepresentation of research that he does. And this is a thought leader in the AI safety community. He does grants on this. He recently wrote a blog post kind of saying like, just because gene-wide association studies haven't found the gene for heritability of schizophrenia yet, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There's like roughly a sentence in there, which is a wonderful sleight of hand, because in that context, like, there's no reason to a priori expect a gene to exist, because heritability is not the same as there is a gene that causes this. Heritability is just a population level statistic that needs further study, basically. And if gene-wide association studies don't find like single genes, then at least you probably don't have a single gene. It might be multi-causal, but in that context, the uncharitable people, or like then read as like, because a big part of his worldview appears to be tied up in the idea that genes matter a lot and eugenics is in some way a good thing, because he's also on the record of like unironically loudly thinking about donating to an efficient charity, which basically says like, if you're poor and get sterilized, you get basic income to some level, and that he like is only half joking of donating to it, which like, if you dig around, or if you want me to source this, I can try to find, because these are like big statements. But like, this is genuine like eugenics stuff, and they're also trying to, on less wrong, constantly, like a small minority maybe, but a tolerated minority is trying to rebrand like eugenics as something else. I think they call it like I don't know, like eugenics, or like something about improvement, like gently eugenics, whatever. But it's still eugenics. And eugenics is a bad idea, not because of like, oh, we shouldn't touch the sanctity of human life, but because we don't know what's useful. If we start messing with our genes as imperfect monkeys, then we might go into an evolutionary dead end, on top of it being immoral. But I'm trying to give like you're a complete immoral psychopath. The only thing that will convince you is basically eugenic self-logic. If you adopt the eugenics logic and you think genes are really important, and you give an imperfect society control over that, before you have created utopia, you shouldn't be doing eugenics, because you might mess things up and lock us into like the dark path of the future forever. That's like the internal logic. It's not the thing I would use as an argument like with a normal human being, because like there's like better ones, but just within the same logic, you can kind of debunk it. And the people that really want to bring back eugenics, or this type of like rich people are somehow inherently superior because IQ, because of genes, because of something that just makes them better, and therefore like all of inequalities are okay. And really what is the problem is all of these regulations protecting weak people from people like Peter Thiel. Like, these people are funding one section of AI safety debate that talks about one part of externalities and not the other part.
Right.
So that's the loop back to where I went off this.
So before I ask any more questions, I wanted to make sure that you got to say everything that, like, all of the points that you wanted to discuss when you came on, because I'd like to make sure that you have the opportunity to mention anything that you haven't.
I went through most of them already, because I kind of made like an agenda. Like, one thing that would be important to me is that like I like this stuff really enrages me sometimes, because I'm autistic, I have ADHD, I'm Slavic. Like, if like eugenics becomes the norm, then I am dead. Which is something that I would like people who listen to this like take into account when they consider it maybe being a thing. Like, I wouldn't exist if that becomes a thing. And so this is why when we talk about stuff like IQ, when we talk about stuff like artificial intelligence, like, even if it might feel like a neutrally discussed and like impassionate thing, like it has actual threats for people. And like I don't mean to be mean to Scott Siskind. I use his last name because he made such a big stink around the New York Times article, and because he previously broke his own pseudonymity. So I think he's a giant hypocrite, and my name is out there. But I don't think he's evil. I think none of these people are individually evil. I think none of these people are like to be demonized. Even Elon Musk, who I kind of use as like as the example of like the bad type of like power wielder, is really kind of like a tortured soul in a hole that the world has made to be filled by somebody. And in the same way, like I think that like the criticism I leverage at Dan Hendricks is not because he's evil or stupid at all. I think like there's like dynamics at play that are like that create holes for people like this, and he just happens to be in the role that when I have to critique. And I also think it's important to say that I am really strongly opinionated against all of this stuff, but I'm glad people like EY exist, for example. And I'm also glad that people like Dan exist. I'm less glad that people like Elon Musk exist because billionaire, but like if the billionaires weren't there, they're all these intellectuals, perfectly fine. And like this like debate, like there's like a Hegelian dialectic that I think is actually valuable. But and if like my perspective on this gets integrated into some of the thing of theirs, and like I've also like changed some of my opinions because of the debates I have had. Like I think that's a good outcome. So like I'm trying to like state that like I'm not trying to like shit on everyone, and I try to like give Steelman article. That's like one thing. I think I went through a thing of the Pascal's mugging, which I think is the biggest kind of like trap for people in this field. But like I think the only way to avoid kind of getting into the weirder stuff is to just demand this mechanistic pathway and to just not accept the gap. Like it is just an illogical argument. Otherwise, if you want to be rational, you cannot accept that. Otherwise, like you are in a situation of like, if you assume 1 = 2, you can prove that I'm the Pope. It's like a famous thing.
Right.
I've said the thing about like Kate Crawford, also like Emily Bender, Timothy Gabriel. Like these people are like actually like in the field doing stuff, and also like other people, and like there's people doing good research on this. Like I actually like Rohin Shah in the community because he's usually quite like moderate in his claims. Like he's very like precisely scoped. So it's not like I fully disagree with it. I just think there's this missing ingredient, which is this power dynamic and this view that I also talked about of like the attention economy and the reality of us living in a world with billionaires that have bootstrapped this field, kind of like corrupting a lot of the stuff that is the easy research. These are things that is basically the main message. One of your things is what should people do if like they buy my argument? Like what now? Like if I still want to do AI safety, if I am not motivated by doomerism, but I just find this thing cool, or I want to help, basically, what should I do? In my opinion, is like push for like very strong, like liberal, like positive liberty style party, like get political, make an informed political and historical reading, strengthen democracy. Like it should be on the table of having a democratically collectivized kind of like governance of stuff like OpenAI, because part of the reason I'm pushing for open source is that we're in capitalism, and here we're playing a power balance game. Like if we don't have open source ML, we just become sharecroppers for OpenAI style things. So that's why if we had the assurance that like a Switzerland level of democracy, world governance has the control over that single AI agent, I would actually buy a lot of like AI safety arguments for centralizing and locking down a lot more if there was like credible, trustworthy institutions like this. So that means if you're interested in this stuff, research trustworthiness and efficient sharing of power. And I don't mean crypto. Crypto bros have the same like capitalist and speculation dependent and like social level. I mean mechanism design. I mean like academic research on mechanism design and scaling voting and consensus. If you want interesting technical problems, then scale consensus making machines with actual humans in the loop, not like Raft or Paxos, but how do we set up like debate mechanisms that are mediated by maybe actors that you need to hire, so including like the emotional avatar thing, and use AI for it. Like do like a deep fake of like a nice moderator that guides your local group through the discussion, and scale consensus based democracy. That's one concrete technical thing that if you want to do AI safety like to work on, and also like empower the people that are being operated on by the current systems. So like AI countermeasures, AI defenses, watermarking, like all of these things like are meaningful. That's why I also like Peter and his like stakeout AI, for example, because like he's like using that angle to protect like people who are being in the process of being marginalized right now, and to like avoid that. Yeah, and also like do boring research. These will give you like a historical ground that you don't need to agree on, but like at least like have a solid like rebuttal if you disagree with them, and then work on industrial problems, like deliver on the promises if you want to, because like as of right now, a lot of the promises are still promises, and the benefits are more in this like skirting laws type of thing. But like if you can actually make like local LLMs do useful stuff and build a good interface for normal people to use them in a safe way that also encodes things like maybe don't use a chat interface, but actually show the like the letters being generated, and show also like how they switch between different letters according to the probability, so that the user always gets this like subtle user interface cue for this is a machine, this is not a human, like this is not something to be trusted, you need to still think for yourself, like solve those issues, do this interface design that makes it safe to work, and then like kind of you up the actual gains, and with a mechanism design you lower the actual threats, and those things are then like a good thing to do if you're a nerd who wants to dig into this. And like on the risk of offending some people, like you need to be anti-fascist, and fascism is not like just a word, it's my political enemy. Like fascism has meaningful definitions. I like Umberto Eco's definition. It's like this totalizing, hysterical mode of doing discourse. And recognize fascists. Like Trump is doing fascism. There's a wonderful YouTube channel that is called Innuendo Studios that has a place called the Alt-Right Playbook that conveys this really nicely. And it's basically, it doesn't matter if Trump identifies or has any specific goals. Like if the mode of action that he employs is eroding a society in which hardcore libertarian Christians and hardcore sinful gays can peacefully coexist, then he's doing fascism, and that's a really bad thing. And that then creates the abuse possibilities. And you need to become political and like anti-fascist to be able to navigate the moral questions in a meaningful way. So that's like the three advices that I would. You can be libertarian. It's okay. As long as you're like hardcore democratic libertarian, and you actually take the thing of like the maxim of non-violence, something seriously, and that includes stuff like slavery and like coercion through psychological things and material conditions. Like I'm completely happy with people being like hardcore anarcho-capitalist libertarians or hardcore Christians. I have a friend who is like hardcore Christian in the sense of he is skeptical about the earth being older than 6,000 years. Because he hasn't seen the evidence himself, and he's like a good Bayesian, so he's just skeptical. But he doesn't believe in restricting abortion rights, because he thinks that the current society is too unchristian to women to force that onto them. So we first need to become sufficiently Christian that like having a child is just not a problem. and like we make sure that they don't suffer from it before like we can kind of like restrict their ability to choose for themselves like that. And like that is like a completely like foreign way of thinking to it, but I hugely respect that because he's such a nice person in his frame that we kind of align on the consequences again. So like be political, I don't care how, as long as it's like this like nice democratic way. Work on actual like industrial problems, cognizant of these political considerations and the history of things and your externalities. And if you want to work on the risks of AI, work on the risk of the abstract system through mechanism design, through these interface things that like tackle the actual problem, not the Pascal's mugging that you just need to completely shut down. That's like the main points to summarize again.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I do have a couple more questions. I just wanted to make sure that we definitely like were able to have that. You mentioned earlier that for biorisk, like you think that's one of the more plausible ways that things could. Obviously, I
see a mechanistic pathway how AI can meaningfully increase the risk of bioterrorism. Is like the precise way of stating it.
Yes. So currently, that seems to be one of the primary arguments, basically, especially in terms of what's motivating policy. Biorisk through AI is often cited when thinking about like how we should restrict these systems. And the research that has been done on this problem, I feel, is not yet rigorous enough to make that claim. Now, I think intuitively, if you think about it, if you believe in the capacity of these systems to, generate meaningful advice on this area in a more efficient way than like using a Google search engine, and you see that because things are scaling so quickly, that could go beyond what we feel comfortable with very easily. Like I think that makes sense. However, the counter argument right now is, okay, but you haven't actually proved that the LLMs are making that pathway easier. If you look at the other difficulties in that process, there are still many different things that will stop you. And also, if you just compare the LLM to Google right now, well, we don't know what that difference is because no one's done it quantitatively. Oh, this is actually no longer true, but more on that coming up soon.
I agree. It's like when I say like I can see a mechanistic pathway, like there's still the uncertainty on whether it's actually like realistic. Whether like if you do the like product of the probabilities, you will actually see a risk that if you do like the rational trade-offs would make you shut this stuff down. So it's a very weak statement, but I see it's like the most realistic thing. There was a paper a bit recently by the boss of a friend of mine at the organization that I just sent you the link to, who is like an activist in bio safety in this regard, who I actually like again respect them, and like like he apologized for like the framing of the paper and he clarified things. So they did a paper where they showed that like the spicy llama can actually like unlock parts of the causal pathway to synthesizing Ebola or something like that, or like some relatively well-known but bad virus, basically. And I hated that paper, and I basically bitched to my friend about it. And he told me, yes, he has posted a clarification on Twitter and has apologized for the framing and like because like basically it was one of these things where like maybe there was a like a cautionary, hey, maybe let's talk about this a bit more seriously point to be made, but it was kind of done in a scaremongering way that wasn't supported by the evidence presented. That like possibly key parts of the process are still not unlocked by the thing. So like de facto, like the risk wasn't increased, and it didn't really consider like all of the other dampening effects.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was following that because actually basically my initial paper that I was thinking of applying to be an AI safety camp research lead, and my paper that I wanted to write was very similar to that, but looked more at the whole process as opposed to just like the LLM aspect of it. And the reason I decided to withdraw was because I was worried that I wouldn't have the expertise and resources sufficient to ensure like info hazards were not realized in it, just because I don't have as much experience in that area. And it seemed like a relatively significant portion of the contribution might have already been demonstrated by this paper, in the sense that, like, to me, I saw it as a sort of a warning sign, like, hey, we should look more into this. But it does seem that, yeah, I guess some people took it as like evidence, and then that's now being used as an argument by people who don't believe in the dangers.
Which I actually want to flag this as a like thing where, like, even if you completely disagree with me and you think AI safety is like exactly how it's how EY predicted it's going to happen, the fact that kind of there is no kind of like honest research, that people are kind of like very kind of like looking for the bullshit, and there's kind of like a self-poisoning of the well, is kind of a reason to try to ground it away from the Pascal smuggling. Like, even if you have like a fully rational argument, then you should still kind of argue with me to completely shed a lot of the discourse, or at least to like recontextualize it without the Pascal smuggling and with this mechanistic pathway, because that will enable you to have like a good faith debate with people to get convincing. Because I agree with you, like, as a warning shot, as a kind of, hey, we might want to like, if you phrase it like that, I think this paper was good. And I think actually like kind of like it is totally worth doing more research on whether you actually get a capability boost that you can't get from Google, for example. And I also think his overall goal is really good, like reducing the ease of bioterrorism as part of our like economic system. So that would mean like KYC rules for DNA ordering, which like in banking we do that. So why not for DNA stuff? And
right.
You can do some like carve outs for home tinkerers that like literally you just need to register, and small dosages you can get, but then there's like some tracing of like this is part of a surveillance thing which has its own problems, but like there's a debate to be had there for reasonable mechanisms to reduce like also the easy to control factors, I would argue, because the big kind of divergence I have from this crowd is you're not going to stop it on the like knowledge side, because like there's like an example of like I think it's called the Tokyo subway attack or something like that, where like or like some cult tried to manufacture some poison,
yes, I know what
or
you're
something
talking
like
about.
that. And I think that one failed because of some reason. They got caught, but it was literally like a biochemist who was part of that effort, so he had the know-how like fully legitimately in a sense. And like my kind of take, because I'm a kind of dirty lefty and like people don't need to agree with me on this, but like would like make a society where nobody wants to do bioterrorism, then you fix bioterrorism. And like the people that are insane, I have this conjecture that like you cannot do a lot of things once you reach an insanity threshold. Kind of like ISIS is the largest completely insane mechanism, even that isn't completely insane, that is kind of stable, because in order to kind of like survive as an abstract entity, you need to have like a certain level of like rational like functionality, and that makes you predictable with incentive structures. And so if you make it so that the rational person or the halfway rational, like limited rational monkey just wants to watch porn instead of doing bioterrorism, then like you have fixed that risk factor. And I think it's easier to do that than to like shut down the knowledge of theoretically doing that. And in the absence of achieving that fully, I think it's better to then like shut down on the DNA, the processes. Do a thing of like, if you buy a certain amount of fertilizer, you will get weird questions. Like you can have this, and then it's more complicated to sell than ban scary AI. Only have the good people have AI systems.
So, building off of that, one thing that I think, at least I question from Mistral, who released their model open source, is the manner in which they released it. To me, and again, this is, I guess, just intuition and speculation, but based on my understanding of sort of Mistral's stance, they strategically chose to release their first model, as a torrent link because it would be the most difficult to fully remove after the fact. And they were probing the government response to see what would happen. And because nothing happened, they did it again. And so now they're setting a precedent that they are releasing things via torrent. What this is going to do is, if it is ever established that, this technology was too advanced to open source fully in the way that you have done it, if, let's say, democratically, like regardless of, we're going to assume best practices arrive at this decision. So democratically decided, everyone's like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have this out there. Because of how they've released it, it is almost impossible, if not completely impossible, to actually regulate it after the fact.
So here, basically, like, I don't think it's impossible to keep information secret. Like, I don't think this like very strong statement of like, just make it all public because it will come out anyway is a thing. But I think it's not worth the effort of trying to keep the knowledge under control. I think if you make the operators liable, like, it's just code, it's just software, you can release it. It's like out there. Let's put a pin in the question of crypto code and export controls and stuff like that, because that is like worth discussing. But by default, I think treat it as software, make the operator of the software liable. You cut down on most of the risk factors. It doesn't matter who has the models. You need to legislate like running the thing and using it, because in my world model, just having the code and running it on a small scale is never the thing that makes you powerful, because I don't think intelligence on its own makes it. Like, even let's assume I have like my phone here, and on this phone I have GPT-15, and it's literally like the super intelligence. What am I going to do with that? Like realistically, like thinking through that. I'm a small autistic ADHD person in Switzerland. I don't know Biden. Like, if I call him, hey, I have a super cool AI system, nothing's going to happen. So, okay, so I might get filthy rich by trading if I can get an interface. But like, if it runs on this phone and like all of the data needs to be streamed in, like, I can't afford the data. Like in order to do stock trading, you need to have like lots of data. Okay, so like now I need to get capital. Okay, how I'm gonna do that? Like, I know some people because I do startupping, but that's already like a separate like social competitive advantage. Like, my intelligence or the super intelligence has nothing to do with that. Maybe I can try to do like some stunts and some tricks, but like, it all depends on my skill to convince other people, and then maybe the super intelligence can coach me on that. but can I execute on it? I can't afford to hire an actor. So like there's all of these like enablers that are in the way of even if you get that thing, and that's assuming you can run it on a phone, which is like the toad that we had to swallow to get to even that like mechanistic scenario. Realistically, if you have something super smart right now, it's not super intelligent. It's the specialized intern idiot. It costs lots of money to run. That's going down rapidly. Okay. But the stuff that's actually capable still costs a lot of money to run. So if you just make that specialized hardware that you need to run KYC, hackers are not going to be happy, but you can make like a castrated version, and then at some point the hackers are going to like open that one, but that's going to be like a lot of effort. You need like dedicated like energy to do that. So you already kind of like cut out the, yeah, bro, I'm going to let the AI hack the Pentagon, it's going to be lit crowd. Like so you have these ways of introducing friction that kind of like shaves off the risk factors until you're left with dedicated nation state, which you're always gonna have that. Basically, the only thing that's gonna stop that is game theory, mutually assured destruction, basically, or some other like balance of power thing, something that works in the international relations level. So like North Korea probably not gonna get access to stuff that you need to run cutting edge AI. Russia, maybe. China might already be ahead of the US for all we know. Like they have a lot of people. They're really smart. I don't think so, because I don't think that like if we think of like the frontier and what we know publicly, I think the gap is always much less than people think, and I don't think that the highest level, like if you think of the logistic function of where things peter out, I think we're already quite close to what you can get from the current things, where like you might still like get all of the skills to 100%, but it's still going to be that specialized intern idiot. So those risk factors are again, and then like the cost of running these things is still at the point where in order to actually get useful performance out of these models, you need to run so many like parallel runs and do like chain of thought and all of these other hacks that up the benchmark numbers, that the energy cost and the time investment is such that you might just as well pay a guy on Fiverr to do it. Unless you're using venture subsidized stuff, unless it's more about like you don't have to explain this to a person. Like, I have this laptop, it's paid for by my work, I generated a bunch of funny pictures for my girlfriend to do it because it's basically free for me. But if I had to buy this laptop for those funny pictures, and then like I actually tracked the time that I spent on it and my salary and so on, it would have been probably cheaper to do it via Fiverr. Is like one thing. This is like the happy case of like I don't need specific quality. And the stuff that you can still run without that, like the industrial garbage, like copy editing, for example, that is only useful at such big numbers that you also need the industrial equipment. So like that friction kind of like eliminates my personal fear for just releasing the weights as for now. And if we ever get evidence of anything that's actually like super intelligence and that can do things that meaningfully boost you, if you don't already know how to do it, if you're not an entity that might just as well hire humans for it, and you're just making like a capital allocation decision for efficiency gain, those people, you already have mechanisms to deal with them, and for the rest, this added friction will take care of that. And that's like the generalized take I have on it. And then going back, like the case for keeping it secret and the export control, like for cryptography, I've solidly arrived in the thing of like, yeah, everybody should have cryptography. Like export control on that is fine, and like society more or less agrees. Like countries still like to try to constrain it a bit, but it's more like countries always reserve the right to do everything. It's not actually something that you worry about. Like if you write SSL, you don't worry about SSL being used in North Korea, for example. And the argument of like enabling bad players to do stuff with it, and therefore we might want to put legal constraints on that. Like, I think you need to have a very high demonstrated risk on not doing that, and the willingness to invest a lot of resources for that to succeed. And it's not going to be something where we can pass a few laws and penalize some people and then you make a dent. And with that in mind, I default to just, okay, sure, make it open source, like torrent, publish everything. I think you can criticize Mistral on it being like marketing stunts, like you said, of like you're basically creating the fact that this is out there anyway, and like artists are being plagiarized already by other people. So this creates the legal framework. You do like legal gardening. I think that's a critique. But just the idea of releasing it via torrent, just the idea of releasing it, I don't really think that's an issue to be concerned about until we see that gain of capability demonstrated to a huge extent and the causal pathway for like the general public and small resource bad players to like act on that. And like I don't want to downplay deepfakes as for like either the porn deepfakes or like the misinformation deepfakes. But these are not the threshold for me where I would say it's not worth it, because like they're basic like Photoshops, and we had these before already. Now they get a bit cheaper, so that's for me like not a sufficient gain in capability and gain in risk than before, and we have legal frameworks to deal with them already. So it's horrible for the affected people, but it's not enough to create this huge market distorting and like market game theory distorting intervention.
Okay, so we did talk about this AIxBio stuff a good bit in the episode with Spider-Man, Dr. Park, but there have been a number of recent studies which warrant an update. So first, both OpenAI and RAND both conducted research to evaluate whether or not access to LLMs, in addition to the internet, as it exists today, was enough to significantly lower the implicit knowledge barrier for planning a biological attack. Although OpenAI's study should be taken with a grain of salt, as the company is financially incentivized to downplay the capabilities of LLMs in order to reduce and postpone regulation, both RAND and OpenAI found that there was not a statistical difference between performance of teams with access to LLMs and the internet compared to teams which only had access to the internet. Although this risk should continually be reassessed as additional scaffolding frameworks, tooling, and models are released, it does provide evidence towards the idea that, right now, LLMs do not increase the marginal risk of biological attacks from malicious actors. If you're interested in this stuff and haven't listened to my interview with Peter, give it a listen and or check out the resources I link on the topic in that episode's show notes. Okay. So what about and I think we touched on this at the very beginning, but just wanting to sort of bring this back in. Mistral, again, they don't release data, and they don't talk about their training process. They just release the weights. And I believe they actually even assume that you're going to implement the architecture of the neural network as well. What are your thoughts on that?
We know that OpenAI trains on copyright material because of the Gary Marcus report that, like, if you ask for an Italian plumber and his brother, you get Luigi and Mario, including the hats. Like, right. So, like, we know it is standard usage to train on copyrighted data. And then they make the fair use argument, which I think will not fly. I hope it will not fly in the long run, because by then a JPEG is also fair use process. If you do a bit of compression, it's the same thing from an algorithmic perspective. And once the legislator understands that an LLM is basically a very complex JPEG, then I think the fair use thing will die, and then they will be sued for copyright. I hope so, at least. So that's my take. In my opinion, the only way to like interpret the Gary Marcus observation that it can get what Luigi and Mario look like without describing it. Like, it needs to have seen an image of them, and like that's gonna be copyright material. And the same thing for Mistral. So like, in order to do what they want people to do, they need to commit copyright infringement. So they are strongly incentivized to not talk about the data process, because they can't say we scraped everything, we did zero checking for copyright. Like, that's the main thing. I wish they would share that stuff, because for accountability you kind of need it. But if I have to choose between Mistral winning and OpenAI winning, I would like Mistral to win, because at least they will be bound by the fact that other people can run the model, and that will keep the price down. And it's also possible for researchers to probe it, and like it's like source available, right? Like, source available, you get a lot of the benefits of open source already without the kind of lefty perspective, like without the market thing. And this is not even that. This is like source available. Like, this is like the business license thing. Like some open source projects are doing like a open business license where you're allowed to use it internally, but you're not allowed to resell it, because they are making their money as a software as a service thing. So you're not allowed to compete with their business. But if you want to just self-host it, you can. And you can even use it commercially as a self-hosted thing. So like, purists hate these, and I am okay with it, because it seems like a sustainable way to get like most of the benefit of open source, including the fact that you can migrate away and you keep the like vendor honest. So like, I can live with the Mistral model, even if I'm not a fan of it.
I've sort of distilled this over the past couple of weeks, but I think that currently my goals and sort of like the problems, the core problem I see is that currently there are a lot of really complex technical problems. So climate change, AI systems, all of these have deep areas of research, and the cutting edge research at this point is so hard to access. And so what I think the best thing to do is to try to democratize the conversations around these technologies by making, like, contributing to and engaging with them in a meaningful way accessible to as many people as possible. What are your thoughts on it?
I think, yes, it's an important thing, but it needs to be done I think like average people like non-technical people, non-tech bros have a good read on AI. They don't trust it. They know it's going to be used against them, and like, they don't buy all of the high promises. Like, that's part of why the AI safety crowd is doing A/B testing on how to scare them into like becoming more afraid. And then like the AI moratorium crowd is trying to scare them into full the way, shut it down, which again, I'm okay with that. But like, OpenAI is really threading the needle of like, it could be so great, but it is also very dangerous. But you're gonna get UBI, no worries. Just sign up to WorldCoin. Like, they're trying to thread this needle. So like, you shouldn't do that. And like, if you only scare people, or if you make it like the problem accessible without the historical context, without stuff like in Kate Crawford's book, where you reframe it in a like calm way, then you're part of the problem. Whereas if you hammer home the message, well, this stuff is boring, except for nerds. I find this stuff cool, but I'm German and a nerd. I'm a very boring person. Like, what we're talking about used to be called operations research, but we're now repackaging with different algorithms every single time, and the underlying algorithm doesn't even change that much. Like, we're still doing, like, for every interesting problem that is actually hard, you still have a mixed integer linear program solving it, like Z3, all of these symbolic solvers. you might use learned heuristics now, but you still use the same algorithm, the same encoding, just with more like constraints and variables. And driving home that point, and also kind of showing the incrementalism in the field, like is really important. But like, we're still doing linear regression. It's not wrong to picture it as a hierarchical linear model, but you say like, and if you describe it like that, and you give people like the through line as like, okay, here's linear regression, now here's a hierarchical linear model, like breaking it down in like these very like lame and approachable but still mathematically precise things, and then making that engaging, I think, is an art form. Like it would be something on the like, okay, here's like the speed run of linear regression to modern AI, detailed enough to give you like the correct mathematical intuition about it, and so you're not scared or impressed by it, so that you look at the fancy analysis and say, okay, what's your feature, or what's your architecture. You feel competent in asking that. You lose the respect for it, but not enough to build it. You don't need to know how to build it. You just need to know enough to call bullshit on it. Because bullshit is a technical term when I like use it in an actual like and bullshit is the attempt to convince you with no regards to making true statements. Like technobabble is bullshit. You just say something and people just accept it because you gave them something that they can believe in, but then there's no truth content to it. And in AI, a lot of this like politics is bullshit. It's trying to get people to accept that you're not doing copyright infringement when you clearly are.
Right.
And how do they do that? LLM, AGI, neural network, deep learning, and all of these terms are themselves a bit bullshit. Like they were originally coined by the researchers to kind of show their inspiration, but they stuck around because they were useful marketing materials.
Yeah, because they're sensationalistic.
Because people like them and they attach to them, and like I think like every researcher is a content creator. Like the person, like Robert Miles on YouTube, is the same as the guy writing the paper, just with different audiences and different like level of critique. And like where Roger Ebert was scoring a movie on like the tastefulness and his kind of like what he liked about it, the reviewer also like, oh, I would like to see a p-value here. That's not like always a rational thing. It's just like the taste of a reviewer. There's a wonderful book on this. It's called The Rhetorics of Economics. That every paper is a rhetorical exercise. It is not a exchange of facts and logic. It is a carefully crafted expose by evolution at this point, but it is an argument. It is, here, I make this claim. Either you make the strongest possible argument, here's my mathematical proof. If you buy the premise, then I am correct, or the whole system breaks. But in the absence of that, you say, hey, look at this finely crafted table. Look how my method is clearly above the other methods, and up is good. And look at these error bars. Clearly, I have ablated this enough to convince you that it is not a mere statistical artifact. Look at this p-value and how it is below 0.05. Like, all of these are arguments to get you to emotionally accept the statement. And like, with that in mind and like that knowledge, I think that's also something to give to people. You can start to decode papers as well, and you can sort out bullshit papers, and the whole field becomes a lot less impenetrable. So like, you need to do all of these things and not get lost in the details. Like, it doesn't matter what a transformer is. What matters is it's a function, you fit it, it can spit out what was in the data set, it can spit out slightly differently what was in the data set. We don't know exactly what it does, but we have some good ideas on what it does. And it takes enormous amounts of carbon and energy to train and run, and enormous amount of copyright infringement to deploy for commercial use. That's the TLDR. You need the bare minimum of underlying knowledge to be able to like convince yourself that these are true. Like, you need to give people enough kind of like skills to check that, and you need to give them your references to where they can learn more details. But that's a level of like accessibility that I think is really like required, and it's really difficult to not get trapped into more detailed stuff. And I think there's also a place to do like the nerdy type, where like, oh, look at this cool tech. But if you're looking for like the specific thing about the discourse and to improve literacy, I think it is easy to get lost in the tech when the tech is the least important thing in these things. And like the tech is by itself like interesting enough because it's been evolved to get like interesting itself. So people will try to do that. There's like influencers around explaining AI already for some people. The power relations, the history, the like context, and enough of a tech to be able to make informed judgment. That's the stuff you need to convey to a broader audience. In my opinion, I don't think everyone should agree with me. I have a very specific like socio-political analysis of the world that gives a very specific causality. I have a story that I look at things through the world, and for my particular goals, which is like radical democracy, radical like reformatting of capitalism. I'm not technically anti-capitalist, but I don't think billionaires should exist because like there's nothing in like efficient market that says a single person needs to have that type of power. And Elon Musk is living evidence of that. Like, no, it doesn't actually work. Like the myth of the genius billionaire is indeed a myth. So like I have these things, and then there's like goals I have with that. So like by talking to you, like even if you have maybe a small platform, I got access to like give my talking points, hopefully in a somewhat coherent way, to people. By completely refusing to take seriously the idea of, oh, but maybe the AI safety has some good benefits, and kind of refocusing on the fact that it's doing actual harm and it's not in a vacuum. I'm trying to push this meme of looking at everything with this power and political economy lens that I think is missing.
Okay, yeah, So I think the takeaway here is like, this has been great talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and bringing this perspective. I think it's something that's sorely needed, and taking the time to do that. But yeah, I basically thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. One thing maybe like this is something I'm a bit conscious about. So I lead up to like when you do the editing, if there's a way to kind of like dial down the rantiness and like the tangents and break them up with like comments and like focusing on this like I'm open to be proven wrong on everything I've said. I just think it needs a strong argument because it's missing right now. And I tried to do the stronger version, but they should, like anyone who listens should also look into Piketty, Kate Crawford, Emily Bender, from social like other people that I pointed to as being smarter than me, because I always have this fear of making a weak case for a strong point, if you know what I mean. That like, and yeah, like if you can look into that and kind of like highlight that people, even if they disagree with me, they shouldn't take my word as the strongest version of this claim. Like they can write to you, and then you can forward it if they have like a counter or a question. I can give them like stronger versions if they have a specific like objection, because for me, like I prepared for this a bit in terms of what I wanted to talk about, but I'm interviewing for jobs right now, so it wasn't like I wrote a whole script or I have like the complete references and the super cohesive thing. I'm not funded. Like that's the really frustrating thing, that Richard,
Me neither.
Like Richard Ng and like Rob Miles are funded to do this as their day jobs, and they can present this really polished way. And yeah, like maybe like you can also make that point in a more calm way. That would be something to just request, because I really fear kind of like being angry man on crates yelling at people. Even though I tried to not be that.
You may have noticed that this episode was full of chimes, and that's again largely because Igor has got to be the most well-read machine learning researcher I have ever gotten to talk to. Every single reference that was noted in both versions of this episode, as well as references to all sources used and mentioned during asides, will be included in the show notes. One last item from the almost Dr. Igor Krawczuk is that there are a few papers which he has in the pipeline for upcoming conferences, which I will be able to retroactively add to the show notes once they go public. Like I said at the beginning, I will be posting some updates on the Into AI Safety podcast website in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. Last but most certainly not least, I wanted to give a quick shout out to everyone who has supported the show, whether that is through feedback, contributions, or anything else. I really appreciate it. If you found this episode valuable and think that others could benefit from it, please share it with a friend, on social media, however else people are communicating these days. Just get it out there. Oh, and I've decided that I'm going to switch sign-offs every time based on something related to the content of that episode. So, it's alive!